Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Kate Eves and I am the Chair of the Brook House Inquiry. On behalf of the inquiry, I would like to formally welcome all of you to the first day of Phase 2 of the inquiry's substantive hearing. Phase 1 of the inquiry hearing lasted 15 days. It began on the 23rd of November 2021 and ended on 10th of December 2021. This phase of the hearing will run for 6 weeks until Friday 1st of April 2022, with any closing or of submissions from core participants in the following week, commencing 4th April. During this phase, we shall be hearing further evidence from men who were detained at Brook House during the relevant period, that is April to August 2017, including live evidence from D1914 and D643. Evidence of several other formerly detained persons will be read into evidence. We will also hear from former detention and healthcare staff who worked at Brook House and G4S senior managers and corporate level staff. We shall be hearing from junior and senior Home Office personnel, witnesses from HMIP, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons, Medical Justice and the IMB, the Independent Monitoring Board, as well as from 3 expert witnesses who deal with the use of force, the culture at Brook House and healthcare issues. I shall also be receiving evidence on current practice from Serco and PPG, the current operators of Brook House and its healthcare services. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the work that has taken place to prepare for Phase 2 of these hearings since the end of Phase 1. It has been a great deal of work, and I'm particularly grateful for the cooperation of all core participants and their representatives. My thanks too to those witnesses who have provided evidence to the inquiry. Just a couple of reminders about housekeeping. We will generally sit each day from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. with a lunch break from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. and a 15-minute break in the morning and afternoon. The exception to this will be Fridays, when we will sit from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. with a longer morning break of 30 minutes. Can I also remind everyone that any documentary evidence is displayed simultaneously on screens throughout the room, and a transcript of the evidence will be published at the end of each day on the inquiry website. Any directions arising from the day's hearing will also be published on the website. As you will recall from Phase 1, I made a restriction order granting anonymity to any formerly detained individual unless they wish to waive that right. Ciphering and redactions have been used in relation to the evidence in accordance with the inquiry's redaction protocol and to comply with my restriction order, both of which are available on the website. If there is any inadvertent breach of a restriction order, I will ask that the simultaneous recording be stopped momentarily so that the issue can be addressed as appropriate. Before we begin hearing evidence this morning, I would like to invite Counsel to the inquiry, Mr. Brian Altman QC, to say a few words. I do understand that there have been some amendments over the weekend in terms of the timetable, so I'd be grateful if you could perhaps update us on that, Mr. Altman. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll come to that in a few moments, Chair. Thank you. Chair, when we began Phase 1 last November, there were 24 core participants in all. Since then, D390 has been designated as a core participant at his own request. However, we have also gained as core participants D643 and Serco. So the core participants still comprise 12 formerly detained persons. As a reminder, there are 3 former employees of G4S as core participants, Mr. Syred, Reverend Ward and Nathan Ring, 2 of whom we heard from during the Phase 1 hearings. There are 2 non-governmental organisations as core participants, Medical Justice and Gatwick Detainees Welfare Group, GDWG. There are 8 remaining core participants, the BBC Home Office, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons, the Independent Monitoring Board, G4S Care and Justice Services UK Limited, and G4S Health Services UK Limited, as well as Practice Plus Group, PPG, and of course now Serco. I hope I can be forgiven for not reintroducing their representatives. But I should introduce the representatives of the new core participants. D643 is represented by the Duncan Lewis team, if I can call them that. Nathan Ring is now represented by Mr. Matthias Kelly, Queen's Counsel, instructed by Milner's solicitors. And Serco is represented by Miss Kate Blackwell, Queen's Counsel, and with her Miss Charlotte Watts, instructed by DWF solicitors. So that's all I propose seeing on that subject. As you were saying, Chair, we were due to start with the live evidence this morning of D1914. Unhappily, we can't do that for good reason. And so we will have to programme him later in the timetable. And so what we propose doing is starting or inviting the starting of the reading in of the evidence of a number of detained persons, which has involved bringing forward two detained persons reading in particular. Due to those rearrangements, and in order to allow everybody to be ready for it, can I suggest, given that we're going to have a much shorter day in any event, can I suggest that we don't start now, but we allow everybody to, as it were, get their act together and start at around 11:30 instead?
Absolutely.
So that's my proposal for this morning's work. I think, looking at the programme, that's not going to take up the whole day or anything like it. So on the plus side, we get a shorter day.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we will reconvene at 11:30. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Goodman, I believe we're hearing from you first. On behalf of D1527.
I'm grateful, Chair.
Thank you.
So I'm going to read in D1527's statement. He's unable to give evidence himself. You should have the witness statement and the notes on the summary. The witness statement of D1527. He gives his name and his date of birth, his country of origin and religion. And at paragraph 3, he says, I find it very difficult to discuss in detail the events which took place in detention, as I find talking about this very traumatic. I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression, and I experience flashbacks which make it difficult to recall details and go back over these events. D1527 at paragraphs 4 to 5 explains the considerable assistance he's required and the difficulty involved in preparing his statement, and he refers the inquiry to his Rule 9 answers at DL 000209. At paragraph 6 to 9 he says, I have not revisited my past prior to 2017 in any detail in preparing this statement. I have recounted that history at various times, and to the extent it is of interest, the inquiry should look for the most detailed account to the medical report of Dr. Basu at sections 6 to 11 of his 28th November 2017 report, CPS 000011. The report of Dr. Thomas at paragraphs 8 to 10 and throughout is also helpful in recording what I could recollect at the time nearest to the events. That's HOM 002997. The inquiry should also read my 2 witness statements prepared in the High Court proceedings, the first dated the 6th to 7th of June 2017 and the second the 19th of January 2018, and they are DL 000113 and DL 000111. Prior to being detained in Brook House Immigration Removal Centre, I had suffered mental health difficulties and suicide attempts, which are set out in the medical reports of Dr. Thomas and Dr. Basu. For instance, on the 6th of November 2015, I was hospitalised for 5 days after taking an overdose and was referred to the National Offender Management Service report. See their report of the 6th of June, which is appended Annex 1 to the statement, and which was available to the Home Office. I do not remember the dates exactly myself, but from documents it's clear I was detained at Brook House between the 5th of April 2017 and the 15th of June 2017. I was released following an order of Mr Justice Cranston in the High Court on the 13th of June 2017 following a judicial review challenge to the lawfulness of my detention. Before being transferred to Brook House, I was detained by the Home Office. I'm told that while I was awaiting trial, the National Offender Management Service prepared the 6th of June report on me, and I understand it described me as a vulnerable young man. D1527 explains and quotes from his witness statement in the High Court proceedings dated the 6th of June 2017, which is at DL 000013. At paragraphs 11 to 17, the summary as follows. From before D1527 was detained at Brook House, and upon his detention, his solicitor advocated for his release on grounds of his vulnerability. See HOM 000495 and HOM 000101. He submitted that he met all the categories in Rule 35. Upon detaining D1527 at Brook House on the 5th of April 2017, he had been noted to be vulnerable by reason of his mental illness. No Rule 35 report was completed within 24 hours pursuant to Rule 34. His solicitors wrote letters on the 6th of April requesting a Rule 35 assessment, but still none was undertaken. See HOM 000101. His solicitor enclosed a psychotherapist's report identifying him as a vulnerable young man who is immensely troubled by his mental health issues. HOM 000345_006. Still, there was no recognition of vulnerability, including in monthly progress reports, HOM 000572, and detention reviews, HOM 005751 to HOM 005757. Returning to the statement at paragraph 18, initially I thought it would be better to be out of prison, and it was good to be away from the dangerous criminals, but the detention centre was very scary in a different way. At paragraph 12.1.1.1 of Dr. Bazu's November 2017 report, he records what I said to him, and I confirm this is accurate. At interview, he told me that he found the prospect of moving to Brook House scarier than being at HMP Belmarsh, as he had no idea what to expect. As it turned out, he told me that he felt worse at Brook House compared to Belmarsh because it was less predictable, and one had no idea what was going to happen next. He told me that during his time in immigration detention, he had the recurring intrusive thought that he would have to decide whether he was going to die at Brook House or in Egypt. He reported that he tried several times to kill himself at Brook House and was treated very badly by the staff there. However, given his previous experience, he had come to the conclusion there was no point complaining. He said that at Brook House there were particular times during the day when he was not locked up, and that he spent the first 15 days in a single room before then sharing. He told me he was taken to Ewing frequently. He said that his experience was terrible throughout the time he was at Brook House, and that the mental health nurse did nothing. See CPS 000011. Summarising paragraphs 19 to 24, D1527 recalls being inducted at Brook House. At paragraph 24, he says, I can see that they did not tick to say that I arrived on ACDT, which is incorrect. I was on ACCT at the prison when I was transferred. I also have seen that it says I had no thoughts of suicide or self-harm or any immediate or urgent needs. I do not remember ever being asked this. It was incorrect. And then returning to the statement at paragraphs 25 to 28. I don't recall ever being asked about whether I was suffering from depression. I arrived at Brook House from I arrived on ACCT, so it should have been obvious that I was struggling with my mental health. If they had read my medical records, they would have known I was depressed. Everything should not have been on me to disclose. It was a very stressful situation, and they should have read in advance what my issues were. Whenever I did see healthcare, no one ever referenced the medical notes from prison. I don't know if they had my medical records. I have been told that records say they did not, but no one ever referred to them at any point. But I had really bad experiences with my mental health in prison, and so I would have thought this would have been really important information for them to have on me for my arrival at Brook House. I'm told the mental health referral form dated the 4th of April 2017 noted I was not seen on admission, but that I was on ACDT due to suicide threats. It says that I stated I was on antidepressants, but that they had not helped. I was described as quiet on admission and had a history of self-harm, but did not want to elaborate. The mental health nurse on the referral form ticked the following boxes: stress-related, torture-related, immigration issue, depressive disorder, suicide, and self-harm. Paragraphs 29 to 30, D1527 describes the wings on which he was held, his mental health issues on arrival. And at paragraph 31 he says, I'm told that on either the 9th or 24th of April 2017, an officer at Brook House IRC called Calvin Sanders boasts that he hit my head against a table and bent my fingers back. The officer admitting this features at between roughly 21 minutes and 24 minutes into the Panorama documentary, and DCO Callum Tully has given evidence about it. I'm told that no record was made of the incident by staff at the detention centre, despite his admission. At paragraph 32, he explains that he cannot remember this incident, and at paragraph 33, he says, on the 9th of April 2017, it was noted in medical notes that I had a superficial cut on my left wrist, which was washed with soap. It was not thought that it needed any stitches, and a dressing was applied. I was put on ACDT. I find it difficult to recall the exact days in which I self-harmed and all the specific triggers for making me want to self-harm, but I am told that the records do suggest they often occurred around the same times as abuse by guards. I can confirm that this abuse did make me want to self-harm more than usual. At paragraph 34, D1527 quotes from Dr. Bazu's report, summarising the notes from the Rule 35 pre-assessment on the 12th of April 2017. At paragraphs 35 to 36, D1527 quotes from Dr. Uzerali's Rule 35, including the following comments. He appears credible. He may be a victim of torture, and his scars are consistent with the account. He clearly has mental health issues, but I am unsure whether detainment has a negative impact on this, as he has tried to harm himself in the community. Paragraph 37 explains further correspondence from D1527's solicitors on the 13th of April, seeking his release from detention as a vulnerable detainee. Paragraph 38 quotes from Dr. Bazu's account of the medical notes relating to 17th of 18th of April, including reports of self-harm on the 17th of April. And then at paragraph 39 to 41 of his statement, D1527 says, on the 18th of April, the Home Office considered the Rule 35 report prepared by Dr. Uzarali and concluded that my claim of ill treatment in the past did not meet the definition of torture. The document concluded that despite the expert report saying it was dangerous to keep me detained, in the view of the Home Office official, my needs could be managed sufficiently and effectively by the healthcare team within Brook House. See the Rule 9 question answers at the end of the statement. My recollection now is that I didn't really interact with anyone for the first 15 days or so. I was very scared. I was frightened that I was going to be put on a plane at any moment. I would self-harm during this time, and detention centre staff would come to my room. Sometimes they would come with healthcare, but I didn't feel like talking to them. The staff would say to me that I was just playing, that I was just self-harming for attention. The staff at HMP Belmarsh had said the same thing to me when I self-harmed. This made me feel that no one would take me seriously. They didn't care whether I lived or died. I felt like animals at a zoo were treated better than I was. At this time I did not care. I wanted to die, and so if no one took me seriously, then maybe I would be able to kill myself. I recall that on the 21st of April 2017, I was told by nurse Karen Churcher that because I was self-harming, that I would stay at Brook House for longer, as it would be better for me to be in Brook House than to be outside. See DL 0000111. She said that I would not be released if I was self-harming. I could not believe this when I heard it. I was shocked and upset. I tried to kill myself later the same day. I felt like I had no hope. Being in detention made me suicidal. I was told that because I was suicidal, I would stay in Brook House. I saw no way out except for trying to end my own life. After that, I would not tell a nurse or a doctor if I had self-harmed, because I felt this would just make me stay in Brook House longer. I had some injuries from self-harm. I was seen by the nurse sometimes, but it was only ever very brief, and they didn't stay long. I understand that my solicitors later found this conversation recorded in my medical records, and on the 27th of April 2017 made a complaint to the Home Office about the nurse on my behalf. See paragraphs 64 to 65 below. However, I do not believe the Home Office took any action. Paragraph 42 then quotes from Dr. Bazu's summary of the records for the 22nd to the 23rd of April. And at paragraph 43, the statement continues, I am told that the records show that on the 24th of April force was used against me. See CPS 000011. While I was in Brook House, I experienced serious mistreatment and abuse from Brook House staff. I struggle to recall dates, and because of how traumatic my experience of detention was, I find it difficult to give full details of some events, and now it is many years later. With the help of my solicitors, I am able to state the following. The first time I went to E-Wing, they did not use force, but I was very scared that someone would hurt me. I remember a tall, skinny officer came to my room, which I was sharing with two others, a Syrian and an Egyptian man, and told me I had to go to E-Wing. I had recently cut my hand open, and one of my roommates had reported that I was self-harming. The officer told me I had to go to E-Wing with him, and if I didn't, they would drag me there. There were a lot of officers that were called to take me by force to E-Wing. They took my cellmate out of the room. I was worried that because they had taken them out of the room, it was because they didn't want any witnesses. I was worried they were going to beat me up in the room. I was worried they were going to do anything they wanted to me. I walked with them because I didn't want them to hurt me. However, after I had been to E-Wing and learned how awful it was there, I never wanted to go again. Every time after this, the officers used force on me to drag me to E-Wing. On one instance, I did not want to go to E-Wing, and the staff forced me to go. They used a lot of force on me on this day. They put me in handcuffs and grabbed me by the arms and my neck and dragged me to E-Wing. I could only move when they moved me. I couldn't move my arms or legs at all. They moved me like a puppet. They were controlling my arms and legs. If I struggled, they would wrestle me and try and stop me moving. They would slam me against a wall to stop me from trying to break free. There were about 6 people doing this, but I do not remember their names or their faces. They were being very rude to me, swearing throughout the while they dragged me to E-Wing. I have difficulty in remembering dates, but having discussed this with my solicitors, I believe this was on the 24th of April 2017. I know that force was used against me often to bring me to E-Wing. I find it difficult to confirm that this is what happened on this date, but I believe there was force used on me to bring me to E-Wing on this day. This was very scary. I could only move when they moved me. It made me feel very helpless and trapped. At paragraph 48, D1527 quotes from his witness statement of the 19th of January 2018, which is HOM 032221, setting out his experiences of E-Wing. He says it was more frightening than the main wing, that he felt he was taken there after self-harming or attempted suicide, and it felt like a punishment for self-harming. He says he was treated like an animal, like rubbish by officers, and that Jan Pascali refused his request to go to the mosque to pray when he was there. He describes near daily attempts at suicide and self-harm by multiple methods. Continuing at paragraph 49. As to the events of the 25th of April 2017, I gave the following account at paragraphs 39 to 49 of my witness statement of the 19th of January 2018, which I confirm to be accurate. The next day, which I believe to have been the 25th of April 2017, I cut my t-shirt and tied this around my neck. An officer came to stop me and cut the t-shirt with a knife or something similar. I was choking and I don't remember everything that happened. When this happened, I was having a flashback and I'm not thinking or noticing what the people around me are saying or doing. I see myself somewhere else, back in Egypt, and I don't remember properly what is going on at the time because I feel like I'm somewhere else. I remember people swearing at me, but not about what. After they removed the t-shirt from my neck, I was placed forcefully on the floor of the cell in the middle of the room. I was on the floor for a few minutes, I'm not exactly sure how long. After a short while, I sat on the bed in the cell. I took the battery out of my phone and I put it in my mouth. I don't remember much about putting the battery in my mouth, but I remember it being taken out by force. I did not take it out myself. I know that people were talking about me and being rude to me, but I don't remember any of this. I wasn't listening to them. I did not feel like I was there in the room. I felt like I was somewhere else. I just wanted to die. I didn't care about anyone else or what they were saying. Shortly after the battery was removed from my mouth, I tried to strangle myself using my hands. I know that after this, one of the detention centre staff sat on my head and strangled me. I'm not able to remember too much about this, only that I wanted to kill myself. There was some shouting and then a lot of people came into the room. It's difficult for me to remember exactly who did what and when, because there were so many people that came into my room that day. There were at least 6 people in and around the room when the incident happened. I know that the man who strangled me was called Jan. He was the man who told me he was going to take me to the... He was the man who told me that he was not going to take me to the fucking mosque. I remember being strangled. I remember someone saying to me while it was happening, but I don't remember what it was. I know that it was threatening. I remember at this time that I thought that I was going to die, that the man doing this to me was going to kill me. I remember having a panic attack and hyperventilating. I felt like I was having a heart attack. I was lying on my side and I was salivating a lot. I know that a nurse came to see me, but she only stayed for a minute at most. After being strangled, I was left on the floor of the cell. No one tried to help me up. I was there for about 30 minutes, maybe slightly more. I don't remember anyone saying anything to me while I was on the floor. I felt like I was in a different world. I don't remember much. The next day, the doctor came to see me. He asked me what happened. I said I didn't know, that I didn't remember. He said, "When you do remember, come to see me," and then he left. He didn't ask me any questions, didn't try and find out how I was. He was very dismissive. He didn't even bother to find out what had happened. He stayed for less than 30 seconds and then moved on. This was the only time I saw a doctor on E-Wing. He had not even come to see me. He was doing a round and just came in for a few seconds. I nearly died the previous day, but no one did anything. No one seemed to care. On what I believe, with the help of my lawyers, to have been the 4th or 5th of May, I went to the office and asked for a plate for some food. I was with another detainee. Who I shared a room with. We had both not eaten for a long time. I had several periods in which I did not eat anything. At this point I had not eaten for around 3 weeks. The lady in the office said that she had seen both of us in the queue taking food earlier, and so she was not going to give us anything. I said this was not right. We have not eaten anything for a long time. We were not in the queue earlier. I told her that I had not eaten anything from them for 30 days. She said that she had just seen us and that she would not give me a plate. I got very angry about this and left and went to my room. An officer asked me what had happened, and so I told them. One officer eventually brought me a plastic plate. At this point I was so angry that I broke the plate and put it in the bin. I told the officers to leave me alone, and I closed the door to my room. I put tissue on the window in the door so no one could see in. After a while I left the room, but the officers were still there. An officer approached me from either side. I told them to leave me alone, but they got closer and closer to me. So I jumped from the balcony onto the suicide netting. I had taken a piece of the broken plate and I held it against my neck. I remember seeing Callum, the officer who was doing the undercover filming for the BBC, on the stairs coming up towards me. I told him that if he came upstairs I would jump from the netting. The netting is next to the stairs, which are open all the way to the floor. If you jump from here, you can jump all the way to the floor. A lot of officers and nurses came running and were trying to talk to me. I didn't speak to any of them. 2 other detainees who spoke Arabic were talking to me in Arabic and were trying to get me to come off the netting. They were speaking to me for maybe 20 minutes. Eventually they managed to convince me to come off the netting. I went with one of the men. He was from Palestine, into his room. All of a sudden, all of the officers rushed into the room and grabbed me by force. I put the back cover of my phone in my mouth. They forcibly removed this from my mouth and dragged me to Ewing. When these incidents happened, I didn't tell my lawyers because I thought this was normal in detention. When I complained in prison, nothing happened. I was told the man who attacked me was just doing his job. Who could I complain to? The manager was friends with the staff, not with the detainees. He would do nothing if I said anything. There was so much happening, I just thought it was part of being in detention. I had never been in prison before. I didn't know what the rules are or what normal is. I didn't know what was normal in this country. I would like to comment further on these events. I have spoken with my legal representatives who have helped me understand what de-escalation tactics are. No one said anything to me that I can remember to try and calm me down or anything similar. They just grabbed me and moved me forcefully. No one ever asked for my account of what happened. I have never heard of or filled in a debrief form before. I was never asked for this information after any of the uses of force against me. I don't think that the force was reasonable. In that situation, when someone is trying to end their own life, you need someone to come and help you. You're in a crisis and you need someone to get you down from that crisis. But the officers don't do that. They use force, they bend you and squeeze you, they make you feel more pain. If someone is speaking to you and trying to calm you down, that might help, but they don't do that. They bend your neck, your hands, your fingers. They make you feel worse rather than trying to make you feel better. I did not have a battery in my mouth while I was trying to strangle myself. My recollection is this was removed before I tried to strangle myself with my hands. I have seen that Jan Pascali has said that we smoked a cigarette together and that I apologised to him later that day. He has said that I gave him a hug and shook his hand. It shocks me to have learned this. This is just a lie, all of it. Firstly, I do not smoke, and I never have done. I don't think that officers are even allowed to smoke in the wing. I did not shake hands with him, I did not smoke with him, I did not apologise to him. All of this is a lie. I can't believe he would say this. This is the officer who strangled me, who was racist to me, who told me he was going to put me to fucking sleep. This never happened, and it never would. There was no relationship between me and Jan Pascali. He didn't like me, he was racist to me, and told me I couldn't go to the mosque, and I couldn't have a shower when I was on E-Wing. That was my only interaction with him. After this, I did have some injuries, some stiffness and soreness and pain and redness in my neck, but the most serious impact of this was the harm it caused to my mental health. I still suffer from flashbacks to this day, and to being strangled. He said he was going to kill me. I thought I would die. It was so traumatic for me. This is inside my head and it isn't going to leave anytime soon. Anything that happens to the outside of the body can heal easily, but anything inside your head is very difficult to get better. I just thought to myself after this that I wanted to die. I wanted to die more than I had before. I was already making regular attempts to try and end my life, but I just felt more and more hopeless. I felt so hopeless and alone in my cell after all the officers left. This is not the right way they should be doing things. You have had enough already, to the point where you don't care about your life and you want to kill yourself. If someone uses force on you, who causes you more pain when you are feeling at your most vulnerable, this makes you feel so much worse. It makes it much more likely that I would want to harm myself again after this, because my life became worse. The officers don't care if you feel better or worse. They don't care how you feel. It felt like I was a problem that they just had to deal with for a moment, rather than a person who is trying to kill themselves and who desperately needs help. The nurses and doctors don't care if you feel better either. I had tried to end my own life several times in Brook House. Each time, if a nurse saw me, they would just ask if I was okay, and that would be it. They weren't trying to understand why I felt this way or why I would want to try and end my own life. It always felt like they had something else to do, and I was just a nuisance that was stopping them doing something else. It felt like they all thought they had more important things to deal with than a suicidal man. It makes you feel worse because these people should help you, but they don't. They make you feel worse. I never felt like they took me seriously or cared about how I felt. Paragraph 62 to 63 then quote from solicitor correspondence on the 26th of April expressing serious concern as to D1527's welfare, his suicidal intentions, the removal from association the previous day, and requesting written reasons under Rule 46. And at paragraph 63 he says, I am told that the written reasons requested were not served on me or my legal representatives. I understand that is now known in light of the Panorama undercover filming that there is filmed evidence of collusion between officers and a nurse called Jo Buss after I was assaulted on the 25th of April not to write up the assaults against me as a use of force. Paragraph 64 to 67 refer to further attempts by D1527 solicitors to advocate for his release, noting that they had been put in the dark about the use of force on the 25th of April by there being no use of force forms completed. See HOM 000241. And then he continues at 68, paragraph 68 of his statement. On the 4th of May 2017, I jumped on the Delta Wing netting. I was unlawfully and forcefully relocated to E-Wing on Rule 40. I'm told this incident is partly recorded on the Panorama programme and in the additional footage, and I further set out my recollections as follows. On the 4th of May, I went to the welfare office and asked for a plate so I could get some food. I was with another detainee who I shared a room with. We had both hardly eaten for a long time. I had several periods in which I did not eat anything. At this point, I'd not eaten for around 3 weeks. I occasionally eaten some small items from the shop. I didn't feel like there was any point in eating because I wanted to end my life. I didn't feel any hope at any point in doing things to keep myself well and alive, as I did not want to live anymore. The female officer in the welfare office, Precious Okuli Nwokagis, has said that she had seen both of us in the queue taking food earlier and said she was not going to give us anything. I now know that's her name, as I've seen the BBC footage with my legal representatives, and I knew it was her. I was not asking for any food, I was just asking for a plate. I said that was not right, we'd not eaten anything for a long time. We were not in the queue earlier. I told her I'd not eaten anything from them for 30 days, and she said that she had seen us and that she would not give me a plate. She was very aggressive and confrontational. It made me very angry. I went back to my room and I said I didn't want to eat anything. Whatever I had from the shop, I put in the bin. An officer asked me what had happened, and so I told them. One officer eventually brought me a plastic plate, and at this point I was so angry I broke it and put it in the bin. I told the officers to leave me alone. I closed the door to my room. And then he repeats the account that he gave of the incident on the 4th of May. And then I'm going to read from 77. The officers dragged me from the room to E-Wing. I know that while I was being dragged, there were moments where I stopped and the officers spoke to me. I do not remember what was said. I've reviewed the CCTV footage with my legal representatives, which has helped to jog my memory of these events. I previously wasn't able to remember all the details of all the use of force against me, as I've tried to block these out of my mind, or they've been so traumatic they've been blurred together. I remember DCO Shawkat grabbing me around my neck and dragging me through a doorway. He had my head all the way through his arm like in a headlock, and he used a lot of force on me. His arm was around my neck. It was very painful. I was forced down into a crouch. My back was bent down and they dragged me through the door and down the corridor. I've read the use of force reports, and I can see that this was never recorded. I've also seen that Ben Wright, who was there throughout all of this, did not write a use of force report. There was another officer there throughout the use of force, although he was not involved and did not touch me at any point. He had glasses and a beard, and I had seen him around the centre, but I do not know his name. He also did not write a use of force report about what he had seen, and I'm not surprised about this, as I know that officer would fake reports and cover things up, like what happened when I was strangled by Jan Pascali. Because of this, I wasn't able to talk about the incident with my legal representatives, other than to say there was a lot of force used on me this day. At paragraph 78 to 80, D1527 disputes accounts given by officers of the use of force on the 4th of May 2017. At paragraph 81, under 83 to 86, he summarises and quotes from the independent medical report of Dr. Thomas, HOM 002997, It was sent to the Home Office in support of a further request to release D1527 on grounds of his mental illness, diagnosed as major depressive disorder and moderate severe PTSD and suicidality. It also sets out detail of his medical treatment and food refusal and self-harm. And I'm going to read from the Dr. Thomas report, which is quoted in his statement. D1527's suicidality is currently a severe and acute symptom, and this does not appear to be in any doubt. He described almost constant suicidal ideation, stating in interview that "I want to die all the time." He estimated that he is currently making at least one attempt to end his life every day presently, and sometimes tries more than once per day. And then at 159 of her report, Dr. Thomas said, D1527 also reported having experienced racism at times from IRC staff, including, he said, a guard who had said to him aggressively, "What do you need to go to the fucking mosque for?" when he had asked to leave from E-Wing to attend mosque. D1527 said he had also experienced other IRC guards threatening to deport him, swearing at and or disrespecting him or his religion. His view is that this does not need to occur. This does not occur to other detainees as much as to him from his own observations, and he considers that this may be due to IRC officers coming to conclusions about him based on his case file. 160. As noted above, D1527 is frequently taken to the IRC psychiatric wing, E-Wing, when he is acutely and recurrently suicidal, and there kept under 24-hour per day observation. D1527 said he hates going to E-Wing and that it makes him feel much worse in mood and more suicidal when he goes there due to the constant solitary confinement, with the exception of the observing officer and lack of any privacy. D1527 showed little insight into the rationale for his being taken to E-Wing in interview, however, stating, "They are trying to save me, but I don't want to be saved, I just want to be left to die." Paragraph 82 of his statement notes that the Independent Monitoring Board asked D1527 to sign a life directive in consequence of his food refusal on the 22nd of May 2017. That's at IMB 000036. And then picking up at paragraph 87 from his statement, he says, "I note the doctor recorded at paragraph 159 of her report that I had said to the staff wrongly assumed I was a sex offender. Some of the evidence has become available since shows that I was right about that. The BBC transcripts have revealed that DCO Saunders, who boasted about banging my head on the table and bending my fingers, was recorded on the 9th of May 2017 saying about me, 'He is a right dickhead, and he's a fucking kiddie fiddler man.' I understand the footage shows that the officers seem to have said this because they did not understand my security file. I do not know if they were permitted to have access to this personal data. Whenever the staff used force against me, I told the mental health team that I feel something tingling up my arm. It feels like something is moving in your body, up my arm into my chest and my legs sometimes too. The nurse said this is what happens when you have a heart attack, but they didn't do anything about it." At paragraphs 89 to 101, D1527 recalls his experiences in detail of E-Wing, describing the mental difficulty of being there, the powerlessness, being denied the chance to pray at the mosque, the rudeness of guards, and how he constantly felt afraid there. Paragraph 102 quotes again from Dr. Thomas's report of 31st of May 2017, in which she expresses her opinion as to his mental health, how it was not being managed in Brook House, and his need to be released from Brook House. She said at paragraph 184, "He is not, in my view, receiving adequate psychological treatment within the IRC. He sees only nursing staff there and says he has not been reviewed by a doctor in the 6 weeks of his admission despite his daily suicide attempts. He is prescribed antidepressant medication, which is correct, but this can never alone sufficiently improve his symptoms as described further below." At paragraphs 103 to 117, D1527 summarises the claim for judicial review issued on the 7th of June 2017 seeking his release from detention, which relied on his continued detention as a violation of Article 3 ECHR, even though at the time the particular incidents of physical assault were not known. An urgent hearing was listed in the High Court on the 13th of June 2017. The Home Office sought to adjourn on grounds they had not read the Dr. Thomas report of the 31st of May 2017. D1527 was released by order of Mr Justice Cranston. At paragraphs 118 to 128, he comments on his recollections of healthcare, CSU and access to legal advice.
Mr Goodman, can I just ask you to pause momentarily, please?
Chair, I think there may have been an inadvertent breach of the restriction
Indeed.
order.
I'm sorry, it's right.
A minute.
Okay.
If we can pause to get
Could
the
we
feed
just
stopped.
pause? Thank you very much.
Sorry. Yeah, it wasn't.
Just while we pause, Mr Goodman, we're obviously slightly over time. Roughly how long do you think you have to go?
There's about 20 seconds on there.
Okay, I think we can manage it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, sorry, it's about a minute and a half actually. I've got to read a paragraph.
That's okay. Thank you. Oops.
That's the time. Yeah, and this one's pretty good.
Thank you. Can we carry on? Okay. Thank you. Please do continue, Mr Goodman. Thank you.
At paragraph 118 to 128, D1527 comments on his recollections of healthcare, CSU and access to legal advice. He describes often feeling symptoms like a panic attack or heart attack but receiving no medical treatment beyond paracetamol. At paragraphs 129 to 148, he describes his experience and feelings since release. And I just read finally from paragraphs 145 and 148. I've had a lot of time to think about what should happen from this inquiry. My legal representatives have asked me what I want from all of this. I want there to be a time limit on people in detention. When a person knows they're going to be detained for a certain time, rather than not knowing and having to count up the days they are detained, their mind will relax. It is so upsetting and stressful to not know how long you'll be detained for. You could be there from one day to several years. I've seen that with my own eyes. I've seen people there for years who have no idea when or if they will ever be released. If they knew the maximum time they will be there for, they will have hope. They will know when they will be released. They will be much less likely to want to kill themselves. Not knowing when I would be released and being told that I was being kept in detention longer because I was suicidal made me want to kill myself more. People who have mental health problems like me should not be in there. It's not safe and you only get worse. All they can do is lock you in E-wing when it gets bad. If they're going to keep people with mental illness in there, it should be much better healthcare in detention centres. There are not enough staff there, they are overworked, there are serious problems with the people there already. They don't care and they don't have time to care. There are only ever 1 or 2 nurses and 1 doctor in the whole centre. There needs to be more and there needs to be better healthcare. The doctors and nurses don't have time. It might be that these people don't care, but even if they did, there are too many people to see who are ill, and so they're not doing their job properly. This would not be such a problem if people with serious mental illness are not in there, or are only in there a short time, so they don't get worse, like I did, and end up wanting to die, rather than to keep being detained in there.
Thank you, Mr Goodman. I believe we're also hearing from you, Mr Goodman, for your client D523. Would you like to take a second before we start? Thank you.
D523, in his statement he gives his name and date of birth. In paragraph 1 he explains how the statement's been prepared. At 2 he summarises his background, including his traumatic journey to the UK from Afghanistan as an unaccompanied child in 2007, and that he was granted leave to remain until December 2009. At paragraph 3, he summarises that during 2010 until his recent successful asylum appeal, he had no accommodation or financial support and often slept rough. And at paragraphs 4 to 5, he says, I was first detained by the Home Office at Brook House IRC between the 27th of February 2017 and the 8th of May 2017, which is part of the period I understand the inquiry are investigating. I found this period extremely distressing, and I really struggled to adjust and cope in such a harsh and stressful environment. I've subsequently been detained on 2 further occasions, and in relation to each, the High Court ordered my release from immigration detention owing to the effects it was having on my mental health. Firstly, on the 28th of March 2019, CO 671/2019, after being detained for almost 4 months, and then again on the 23rd of April 2020, CO 1366/2020, after a period of 2 months. The Home Office later agreed to pay me damages of £15,000 in compensation for the period in 2019 and £25,000 for the period in 2020. My difficulties in immigration detention started in 2017 at Brook House, and in this statement I go on to provide an account of my experiences. I also enclose Annex D523-1 specific responses to the general questions that have been provided by the inquiry, and Annex D523-2 specific responses to the questions that were directed to me by the inquiry to ensure they are addressed. At paragraph 6 to 10, D523 explains the background before being detained in 2017, and at paragraph 11 he says, on the 27th of February 2017 I was taken to Brook House IRC. I discussed my time in Brook House in detail below. While I was at Brook House I was introduced to a solicitor at Duncan Lewis. I opened up to them about my sexuality and about my ongoing fear of return to Afghanistan. He helped me prepare a fresh claim based on my risk in Afghanistan submitted on the 28th of April 2017, which has now, after much delay, been allowed on appeal. On the 8th of May 2017 I was released from detention. I went back to sleeping rough and I continued to suffer with flashbacks, voices and bad thoughts. At paragraphs 12 to 15 he explains subsequent experiences of detention after the relevant period, his asylum claim, an appeal and life since 2017. At paragraph 12 he quotes from the independent medical report of Dr. Berman Roy, who diagnosed him with his PTSD and is suffering from a severe depressive episode. At 16 to 19 he explains his induction process on arrival at Brook House on the 27th of February 2017, including that no Rule 35 report was prepared. At paragraphs 20 to 21 he explains that on the 3rd of March 2017 he understands from his medical records that he spoke about his past torture in Afghanistan to Dr. Chowdhury, who recorded that he advised him his account was already with the Home Office in an asylum claim. At paragraph 22 he recounts that a Rule 35 report was prepared on the 10th of March, which identified scarring, noted that the scar may be due to his account of what happened, and acknowledged that his story was consistent with the scarring. At paragraph 23 he explains that on the 14th of March 2017 he was given the Rule 35 response, which said that the Home Office would not release him because the doctor had not indicated that a period of detention would be likely to cause him harm. He refers to the monthly progress reports at paragraph 24. At 25 to 26 he records his first spell removed from association under Rule 40 and describes the CSU. At 27 he says he was taken to E-Wing after this. At 28 he says that CSU was the worst wing, but E-Wing was almost as bad and explains why. At 29 to 31 he summarises a complaint he made and withdrew against Bonnie Sparks on the 20th of March 2017. At 32 to 33 he refers to records related to a Rule 40 removal from association for jumping on the suicide netting on the 26th of March 2017 and food refusal on the 28th to 30th of March. At 34 he refers to records showing he was again subject to a Rule 40 use of force to remove him from association on the 7th of April 17. And then I'm going to read from paragraphs 35 to 36. I remember waking up in the CSU and feeling overwhelmed and really stressed about being in the CSU, and that I was completely powerless to the officers and the Home Office, and like I'd had enough. I decided I had had enough, and I would end it all by twisting a bag round my neck. I remember the light-headed feeling of not being able to breathe. The record of actions and operations states that DCO Fallbrain and another officer entered the room, at which point I removed the bag. My recollection is that I panicked and could not go through with it. Afterwards I recall that an assessment, care and detention and teamwork plan was opened, and that I was placed on constant watch because of the concerns they had about my suicide risk. The records disclosed confirm this. I recall speaking to the manager of security, who I think was called Chris, and I tried to explain that I was struggling in the CSU and in Brook House and wanted to know when I would get out. I remember him saying words to the effect of, "At the end of the day, it's your life. I don't care what you do, mate, but we will have to keep your door open and watch you now." And I also remember him telling me that I was in the detention centre because I had no right to be in the UK and that I could fix the situation by going back to Afghanistan. I remember feeling like the person they had sent to speak to me did not care about me at all, and finding this really upsetting. At paragraphs 37 to 38, he summarises the closure of the ACDT and some of the allegations of failures to follow policy on Rule 35(2) reports in this instance. At paragraphs 39 to 40, he summarises the documentation around use of force in response to a protest in the D-Wing courtyard on the 14th of April. Paragraph 41A to E, he describes his involvement in the protest and that he called the police. I'm going to read 41F to 41A.
Mr. Goodman, I think your microphone may have switched off. Thank you. Apologies for that.
Shortly after I got back to my cell, 5 or 6 officers appeared. I remembered their face but not their names. They were yelling and telling me I was going to the block, the CSU, for being the main instigator of the protest. I denied it and said I would not go. They asked me if I would walk or if they would have to take me, and I said they would have to take me. I remember one officer used a technique to get me lying on my stomach on the floor. I remember one officer had their hand on my head, pushing my face into the floor. One officer had their hands around my neck and was squeezing really tight. One officer was squeezing my arms and hands behind my back. One officer was taking my legs and making them straight. Then all the officers lifted me up and carried me like a plank. I remember someone shouting, "Keep your head down," and I remember there was still a hand on the back of my head to keep me looking down, and someone was holding my hands behind my back. I do not recall if handcuffs were used on me or not. Someone was holding my belly and someone holding my legs, and they carried me all the way to the CSU. My cellmate at the time, I cannot recall his name, witnessed this. After I arrived in the CSU, I had red marks on my neck, my arms and hands. To this day, my neck still clicks, and I wonder if it's from this rough treatment. I was not asked to fill out a form where I could give an account of what had happened. I understand that my healthcare records state that someone from healthcare came to check up on me for any injuries, but I do not recall this. I also understand from my records I was placed on constant watch, but I do not recall this or why it happened. At paragraph 42, D523 summarises the documentary records of his subsequent placement in CSU between the 15th of April and the 17th of April 2017. At 43, he recalls he again phoned the police from the CSU and again there was no response. At 43C2F, he states that while in CSU his phone went missing. He believes it was taken as a punishment for calling the police. I read 43G to H. On the 16th of April at 10 o'clock, the notes state, 43G. I recall that while I was at the CSU, I was forced to spend a lot of time with Derek Murphy, and we had lots of arguments. I also remember that whenever I would be clearly upset at being locked in the room, Derek would make faces at me, sticking his tongue out and chant he, and whistle at me and laugh at me. This made me feel even more frustrated and upset, and like he was getting pleasure from my distress. At some point, I'm not sure if it was that day or the following day, Sunday the 16th of April, I recall banging on the door and calling out to the officers to return my phone. I then remember Derek Murphy coming into my cell, putting his gloves on, grabbing me by my neck and saying he was going to kill me. I felt shocked and scared as I could not believe an officer would do that. I wanted to complain, but I thought no one would ever believe me. To this day, the incident is still with me and I have flashbacks to it, and sometimes I wake up and feel like someone is holding my throat and chest. I accept that while I was in the CSU, I was upset and distressed with officers, and I was swearing and banging my door, but do not accept I used all the language recorded in the notes. The main reasons for this or because my mobile phone had been taken from me and this was my only way to contact the outside world. And also because I really hated being in the CSU, especially with Derek Murphy as the main officer, and I felt trapped, anxious and isolated. On Monday the 17th of April I was taken from the CSU to E-Wing. Before being taken to E-Wing, I remember Derek Murphy gave me back my mobile phone and said, "Sorry, I left your phone in my uniform and took it home by mistake." I did not believe him and thought he made it up, and this made me very angry and sad. At 43 at J to K, he says this, on my way to the E-Wing on the 17th of April, I made a verbal complaint to the reception about the way Derek Murphy took my phone. I accept I was very angry and upset at Derek Murphy and that I told the reception staff he was fat and that someone will hurt him. I regret using those words, but at the time I was so upset and distressed by the way he had assaulted me, goaded and tormented me and stolen my phone. He guesses he did not make a formal complaint. At 44 to 46, D523 summarises some of the documentary records relating to subsequent events, but has nothing to add from his recollection. At 47, he summarises the records of drug use. At 48, he explains he smoked weed every day in detention and spice once or twice, but had a bad reaction and never smoked it again. He saw many bad reactions to spice. At 49 to 51, he gives further evidence about drug use. At paragraphs 54 to 56, D523 summarises his recollections of his second period of detention in Brook House in 2019, and in short, says it all felt the same. D523 confirms his evidence in a statement of truth. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman.
Chair, before we carry on, just in relation to the inadvertent breach of the restriction order, I'd ask if you could make a restriction order covering D1527's name orally, and then that can be confirmed in writing.
I will do, yeah, thank you very much. Agreed. Mr. Armstrong, I believe we're hearing from you next on behalf of D791. Sorry, D790. Do you not have a microphone? Okay. Can we hear you? Yeah, we have had some problems with the batteries, I think, this morning. If you can just give us a moment and we'll try and sort that out for you.
Can you hear me now? That sounds like you can hear me now.
Yes,
thank you very much. Sorry. So I'm reading a statement or the reading in summary of D790, which is his witness statement to the inquiry, is dated 16th of February 2022, and you have the reference number on the summary. Summarising paragraphs 1 to 2, D790 provides his name, date of birth, and notes that he is of Pakistani nationality and of Islamic faith. He states that he has a degree in computer science from University and no criminal convictions. He was detained at Brook House between 20th of July and 3rd or 4th of August 2017. Summarising paragraphs 4 to 7, D790 explains the distressing circumstances in which he came to be detained. He had temporary leave to enter the UK and had made an application to the Home Office for further leave, on which he had been waiting for a decision for more than a year. He explains that he was then required to report to the Home Office. When D790 reported to the Home Office on the second occasion, he was informed his application for leave had been refused and that he had to leave the UK within 14 days. Neither he nor his solicitors had received any notification of this. On the third occasion D790 was required to report, he was handed a refusal letter, handcuffed and detained. D790 describes being taken to Moreton Hall Immigration Removal Centre in the middle of the night. He found it shocking and frightening. D790 had never been detained before. He was fasting because it was Ramadan. Summarising paragraphs 8 to 10, D790 was moved to Brook House without notice after about a week at Moreton Hall. This was on the day of Eid, which should have been a day of prayer and religious observance. He was put in a van and was not told where he was being taken or why. Being unable to perform ablutions or to face Mecca in the back of a van, he missed saying prayers and wasn't able to contact his family as his phone was taken away. He says, "I am years old. and apart from that occasion I have never missed Eid prayers. I will never forget that I spent Eid that year locked in a van being transported like an animal. I am haunted by this every Eid, and I still feel upset and guilty that I missed saying prayers and was away from my family. Summarising paragraphs 11 to 14, D790 describes arriving at Brook House after several hours of driving. He doesn't recall being told anything about his rights, and he was not shown around Brook House. In general terms, he found the induction process at Morton Hall more respectful, friendlier, more helpful and more informative than at Brook House. D790 also describes that Brook House felt and looked much more like a prison than Morton Hall. He was told by another detained person that the netting between landings at Brook House was to stop detainees from committing suicide, and this alarmed him. D790 explains that he arrived at Brook House with an older Muslim man, D853, who spoke no English. The older man was not often an interpreter, and D790 ended up interpreting for the man on arrival at Brook House at various meetings and medical appointments thereafter. D790 describes overcrowding and long queues for the welfare office and to use IT equipment. He states that the atmosphere was tense. There were often arguments between detained people. D790 was frightened to be told by another detained person that there were people in Brook House who had committed serious offences and had been in prison. Summarising paragraphs 15 to 22, D790 describes being held on two different wings at Brook House. Initially he shared a cell with the older Muslim man he had arrived with, but a few days later D790 was moved to another wing. When D790 was asked to stay with the older Muslim man to assist him with interpreting and access to healthcare, an officer said, "This isn't a hotel and you are not on your holidays." The older Muslim man was moved to another wing to share a cell with someone with whom he did not share a common language. D790 describes the cells as small and cramped. He was locked into the cell for long periods without a window which couldn't be opened. He describes the noise at night and officers responding with anger when detained people tried to get their attention. He felt like he was being locked up like an animal and he was scared every night time. D790 also describes not being given new bedding when he was moved to a different cell, having to sleep in dirty smelling bedding used by the previous occupant and having no privacy when using the toilet in the cells. He described problems with accessing cleaning supplies, having to clean the toilet with only toilet paper using his bare hands, and queuing for hours for the showers. At paragraph 23 he says, "I have described how it was difficult to perform the ablutions that the Islamic faith requires me to perform before prayer. Another problem was that the cells were too small to pray in, and I had no prayer mat. There was a prayer mat at Brook House, but the long periods I was locked in the cell meant I could only get to the prayer room for 2 out of the 5 daily Muslim prayers. In the Muslim religion, we are taught that when you are upset you need to pray to God, but I couldn't keep the prayers. I was very scared and anxious at Brook House and I needed to pray. My friends and family outside detention would urge me to pray, but I could only do so twice a day. A lot of Muslim detainees at Brook House were very upset about this. This was a time when people were desperate and needed to pray, but they couldn't pray." Summarising paragraphs 24 to 28, D790 states that there was only one small gym for use by over 500 men at Brook House. Most of the equipment was broken and there was no trainer present. The library was only open for short periods and books and material could not be taken away. In the IT room, the computers did not work or only worked slowly. The fax machines were out of order, the Wi-Fi almost non-existent, and mobile phones didn't work, and in any event, the signal was poor. D790 describes the stress caused to detained people who had no working phone or phone credit. He does not recall any activities being offered at Brook House. He also discusses the poor quality of the food at Brook House and said that he was never successful in being allowed to cook his own food. Summarising paragraph 29 as follows, D790 states that most of the officers treated detained people disrespectfully, never offering to help and usually declining requests for help. During lock-up at night, the officers seemed not to care. They would bang the heavy door closed. D790 felt like the detained people were counted like animals and locked into cages. He describes the contrast between the treatment he received at Brook House compared with Morton Hall. Summarising paragraphs 30 to 32, D790 states he was physically and verbally mistreated by detention officers on several occasions. He describes that on his first day at Brook House he was denied an evening meal because he had not placed an order that morning. He explained to the officer in charge that he'd only arrived that afternoon. The officer told him to wait until the other detainees had collected their meals to see if any food was left. When D790 asked what would happen if no food was left, the officer laughed and said that he would go to sleep hungry. When D790 didn't move, the officer aggressively pushed the plate and the cup he was holding and they went flying. D790 was scared and went to his room without any food. The next day, D790 tried to complain about the incident at the wing office. The officer D790 spoke to said, "Who are you going to complain to? No one is going to listen to you." Summarising paragraphs 33 to 34, D790 describes another incident where an officer pushed him in the chest to get him out of the wing office, where he had gone to ask for toilet roll. D790 felt the officer had treated him like an animal to be pushed around. At paragraphs 35 to 37, he says this: "I was one of the few detainees who could speak good English. I was often the one who asked officers for assistance for both myself and for others. Officers were very often rude to me. The white officer with the large moustache was one of the worst officers. He would often respond to requests with words like, 'Why can't you go back to your bloody country if you're not happy here?' I was scared of that officer and I tried to steer clear of him." On one occasion there were lots of people who were due to be removed and were trying to fax documents to their solicitors. I remember that one Pakistani man was in tears. He couldn't speak English. I spoke to him in our language to find out what he needed, and then I spoke to the officer on the wing to explain that the detainee needed to send an urgent fax to his solicitor about his removal. I remember the officer was a large black man aged around 50 to 55 years old who wore glasses and had a big belly. He asked if the document was for me, and when I said no, it was for the other detainee, the officer replied, "Well, then go, get out, it's his problem, not yours." When I tried to explain that it was a very serious matter for the detainee, the officer became angry, put his hands around my neck and pushed me out of the office by the neck. It was a really scary incident. I was so scared of that officer that I stayed in my room for the rest of the day, only coming out in the evening when I could see the officer had left the wing. It hurt when he pushed me in the neck, and I afterwards found I had a red mark on my neck where he put his hands and pushed me. But the physical impact was less harmful than the mental effect the incident had on me. He was a large, strong man. I am not strong. I was afraid of his power over me and that he could harm me again. I was moved to another wing soon after that, so fortunately I didn't have to see him again. But there were other officers who were hostile to detainees, and I remained very scared of most of them. Before that incident, I thought it important to help other detainees who were in difficulty because I can speak good English and I'm educated. But after that, I stopped getting involved with others because it put me at risk. Summarising paragraphs 38 to 40, D790 also describes seeing officers use force on a young black man who was due to be deported. When the man started to cry and said that he would be killed if deported, D790 witnessed an officer push him in the chest and the man fell backwards to the floor. When another detained person asked the officer not to use so much force, he was told to shut his mouth. The young black man was restrained by 3 or 4 officers on the ground. They dragged him, stood him up and walked him away while he was crying and shouting. D790 never saw him again. The incident made D790 afraid for his own safety, particularly at night time. On another occasion, D790 witnessed officers laughing and mocking a Chinese man for not being able to speak much English when he requested toilet paper. D790 says, "The officers who knew he couldn't speak English replied, 'What? You want to eat toilet paper?' laughing and making fun of him and saying things like, 'Think he needs to clean his bum.'" D790 describes the behaviour as typical of officers whenever detained people would ask for assistance. He states that it was a way of taunting and belittling detainees, which seemed deliberately cruel. Summarising paragraphs 41 to 42, D790 describes that he heard that the officers tortured people on E-Wing. Most of the detainees he met were very quiet. They would say nothing back to officers, even if the officers were rude to them. He observed that the officers were ruder to detainees who didn't speak English. Summarising paragraph 43, D790 describes having 2 or 3 meetings with Home Office officials at Brook House. He found them scary and more formal than the meetings he'd had at Norton Hall. Summarising paragraph 44, D790 states that he didn't make any formal complaints and he didn't know how to. Also, after his attempt at complaining on his second day at Brook House, D790 thought it seemed pointless trying to find out how to make a formal complaint. He thought that complaining would not make any difference anyway, or it could make things worse for him. Summarising paragraph 45, D790 states that a lot of detained people were using drugs. He could smell what he took to be drugs, and he saw people under the influence of drugs. He didn't see officers doing anything about drugs or helping people who were under the influence. Summarising paragraph 46, D790 also became aware of a suggestion that an officer had offered to marry a detained person for £6,000. D790 thought it was a corrupt thing to do and challenged the officer. He describes that in response she looked guilty and very worried, and it was his impression that something corrupt was going on. At paragraphs 47 to 48, D790 says, "I had suffered from kidney stones for which I had surgery before I was detained, and I had received medical advice that if I experienced pain to my kidneys I should take painkillers. During one night at Brook House whilst locked up, I was in a lot of kidney pain. I rang the bell for help, but the officer who responded spoke very roughly to me, told me to go to sleep and refused to call for medical help. I rang the bell again, but he just shouted at me to be quiet. I was given no medical attention, no painkillers, and spent a sleepless night in pain. As I recall, I went the next day to healthcare to ask for pain relief and was told to come back after lunch. When I returned, I was seen by a doctor. I explained my history of kidney stones. He did not examine me and gave me only one paracetamol. I said I thought I needed stronger painkillers, as I was usually given for kidney pain. He declined to prescribe anything else, so I asked for more paracetamol, but he refused. I continued to suffer kidney pain periodically throughout my time at Brook House. I got some more paracetamol from another detainee, and with that I managed the pain. Summarising paragraphs 49 to 53, D790 describes that the older Muslim man D853, who had moved from Morton Hall to Brook House with him, was about 60 years old, received very poor health care at Brook House. D790 had to act as D853's interpreter during his induction to Brook House and discovered the man had diabetes and required insulin. The nurse didn't provide the insulin but told D853 to go to healthcare the next day. However, when D790 and D853 attended healthcare the next day, he was still not provided with his insulin and was told to return the following day. D853 was very distressed by this. D790 was then moved to another wing, but whenever D790 saw D853, he looked very unwell. He said that he had been vomiting and crying at night. The man wanted to return to Pakistan as he was fearful he wouldn't survive in Brook House without the right medical treatment. D790 was very worried about his friend and went to healthcare several times to try to get him better treatment. D790 discovered that he could make a formal complaint but gave up when he was presented with a number of difficulties in doing so. He had also heard that other detained people had waited ages for answers to their complaints, so he thought he would do no good to complain. During D790's detention, he also got to know another man, D1834, who was detained around the same time. D1834 was from the same town in Pakistan as the older man. When D790 was released, both men were still detained at Brook House. At paragraph 54 of his statement, D790 says, "About a year after I was released, I contacted D1834 to see how he was doing. I asked after D853 and was shocked when D1834 told me that D853 died during or soon after his removal from the UK. D1834 told me D853 was removed from the UK a few days after I was released from Brook House and that he died on the flight to Karachi or on arrival in Pakistan. This news deeply upset and saddened me. I do not know the cause of D853's death, but from the deterioration I witnessed in D853 whilst at Brook House, and the difficulties I observed in him getting access to medical treatment, I think that lack of adequate health care for D853 in Brook House may have contributed to his death. D853 was a really good man." Summarising paragraph 55, D790 describes the devastating effects of detention on his mental health. He explains that before he was detained, he had no mental health problems. Whilst he was in Brook House, his mental health began to fail. At paragraphs 56 to 60, he says, "By the time I was released from Brook House, my brain felt shattered. I remember that on the day I was released from Brook House, I stood at the train station, feeling frightened of the people around me, anxious about provoking people, and of being re-detained. Soon after my release, I saw my GP, who diagnosed depression and prescribed medication for depression and anxiety. I didn't tell the GP I'd been detained because I was embarrassed to admit this. I saw the GP several times and then she referred me to the local mental health team. I now see a psychiatrist. I've been on sertraline and other drugs and I'm still on antidepressants. I'm now often very anxious and depressed and find it difficult to relax. I felt frightened all the time I was at Brook House, frightened of the detention officers and anxious that I would never be released or that I would be removed from the UK. The way I was treated and the way I saw others treated made me feel like I was totally unimportant, that I was not worthy of respect and didn't count as a human being. I'm certain that detention at Brook House was a cause of my mental illness. I still get nightmares about Brook House. I tried to watch the Panorama programme about Brook House, but I found it too traumatising. I turned it off after 5 minutes. Whilst I was held in detention, my immigration solicitor put in an appeal against the Home Office's decision to refuse me leave to remain in the UK. After that, the Home Office released me. I was detained for 15 to 16 days. My detention was wholly unnecessary. I've been keeping to my reporting conditions, and after giving me their refusal, the Home Office should have allowed me time to appeal or leave the country without detaining me. I continue to pursue my claim to be permitted to remain in the UK, and I was not re-detained, although I remained in fear of re-detention. It's a huge relief that I have been granted leave to remain in the UK. D790, Madam, then provides a statement of truth, and the statement is signed and dated 16th of February 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you. Mr. Goodman, I believe we're returning to you for D2077.
that all right? Yeah. So I'm now going to read in the witness statement of D 2077. His witness statement is dated the 9th of February 2022 and is at DL 0000226. Gives his name and says he's known to the Home Office as D2077. And he makes this statement as a core participant in the inquiry into the Brook House Immigration Removal Centre. He's a national of Iran and a Christian. He fled in 2016 after he was tortured by the authorities on multiple occasions, and because his life was at risk because of his conversion to Christianity. He's a recognised refugee. I was granted refugee status by the Home Office on the 20th of September 2019. I have been diagnosed with major depressive order and post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a result of my repeated torture and detention in my home country of Iran. I have a history of serious self-harm. My experience in detention in the UK made my mental condition very much worse. I was detained on arrival in the United Kingdom on the 11th of April 2016. I was placed at IRC Tinsley House. I was later released from detention on the 23rd of April 2016 after a Rule 35(3) of the Detention Centre Rules 2001 assessment confirmed there was evidence that I was a victim of torture. I was released on temporary admission whilst my asylum claim was considered in the UK. I was, however, redetained by the Home Office on the 31st of March 2017 with a view to removing me to Germany under the Dublin III regulations on a charter flight. I was initially taken to Campsfield House IRC and then transferred to Brook House on the 6th of April 2021. I was held there until the 21st of April 2017 when I was released on temporary admission once more, after my lawyers issued unlawful detention proceedings for me. During my detention in April 2017 at Brook House, my mental health deteriorated significantly. In desperation, I stopped eating and sewed my lips together and tried to get the authorities to take notice of my despair and to understand what they were doing to me. Paragraphs 7 to 9, D2077 then explains the damage to his mental health which did not improve after his release. He refers to the medical evidence of Dr. Rachel Thomas confirming diagnoses of PTSD and depression previously made by Dr. Beata Godluska, honorary consultant psychiatrist at Freedom from Torture. Dr. Thomas' view was that his past periods of detention have contributed significantly to the chronicity and severity of his current mental ill health, as she reports significant relapse in his mental state around all 3 detained episodes, noting Mr. D2077 indeed described in consultation that if he were to be detained again, it would be like hell to me. When I was there before, it felt like being in a cage. D2077 then explains that he was unable to recover his mental health and was eventually admitted to hospital for mental health treatment on 2 occasions in June 2018. D2077 records the Home Office compensating him for unlawful detention after he brought a civil claim. At paragraphs 10 to 12, D2077 explains that the medical evidence and documents in relation to mental health have not been read back because it's too distressing, and that a chronology has been prepared and attached to the statement. He further explains that he continues to suffer difficulties with attention and concentration and struggles to remember some things, especially traumatic events, and to keep the sequence of events in his head. Reading from paragraph 13, I have tried to forget my time at Brook House IRC as much as possible, but I still have repeated flashbacks of when I was detained there. I still imagine myself in the cell. I still suffer from nightmares and bad headaches. It has been very difficult and traumatic for me to prepare this statement, and I have suffered from anxiety symptoms such as heart palpitations and shaking as a result of the stress that I have gone through preparing this statement. To limit the impact on me, my solicitors have referred to information in documents and reports wherever they can, so I do not have to relive it. I do want to assist the inquiry with as much information as I can remember so that others do not have to have the same damaging experiences as me. At 15 to 18, he explains the background to his protection claim as a victim of serious and sustained torture in his home country. He explains the circumstances of his arrival in the UK in 2016, his rescue from an overturned boat in the Channel, and his detention at Tinsley House on the same day, and that records show his fingerprints had been taken in Germany. At 19 to 22, he explains he did not see a GP within 24 hours of arrival at Tinsley House as required by Rule 34 of the Detention Centre rules, but eventually, after the intervention of his solicitors, a Rule 35 examination was carried out on the 19th of June 2016, confirming there was evidence he was a victim of torture and had mental and physical symptoms consistent with an account of torture in his home country. At 23 to 24, the Rule 35 report recorded several occasions on which D2077 had experienced detention and torture in his home country, resulting in short and long-term memory loss and significant physical and psychological damage. As one of the impacts, it notes he is in constant fear and has developed phobias. Under the section "What impact is detention having on him?" the report records, "Due to being in detention, he is having flashbacks, and when he sees officers here, he fears return." The Rule 35 report also documented the scarring to his body, and the doctor notes lacerations throughout in keeping with the count and recorded them on a body map. At paragraphs 24 to 26, he explains that the Home Office responded to the Rule 35 report in a letter dated 21st of June 2016, noting the medical practitioner had drawn a connection between what he said had happened to him and his medical examination, and that his account was consistent with torture. They concluded that in light of this, his release from detention was appropriate and that arrangements would be made. The Home Office's internal notes recorded that release was authorised and that the doctor's account appeared to suggest D2077 may be a victim of torture. At 27 to 30, following release on the 23rd of June 2016, D2077 found his detention to be traumatising and to remind him of past detention. His GP in the community diagnosed him with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and provided antidepressants and referred him for counselling. At 31 to 33, he explains that he felt stressed and fearful when reporting and asked for his reporting conditions to be changed. And on the 23rd of November 2016, he attempted suicide and he was hospitalised. The following day, the Home Office refused to change the reporting conditions. At 34 to 35, after investigating this event, the Home Office assessed D2077 as safeguarding level 3. I read from paragraph 36 of the statement. On the 23rd of January 2017, the Home Office refused my asylum claim as they wished to send me to Germany. However, they did not tell me this on that date. At 37 to 38, after D2077 was served with a notice of liability of removal on the 6th of February 2017 and a removal window notice, his representatives sent urgent pre-action correspondence to the Home Office about failures to provide documentation and sought disclosure of relevant information. I'm reading from 39 to 40. I've been told that on the 12th of February 2017, following pre-verification checks, the authorisation for my redetention was rejected by the detention gatekeeper on the grounds that no removal directions had been set and I was a safeguarding level 3 case. I've been told that on the 15th of February 2017, the Home Office internal records state that my case had been rejected by the detention gatekeeper twice and there was an outstanding letter before action from my solicitors and therefore detention for removal should not go ahead on the 17th of February 2017. Following further urgent pre-action correspondence on the 27th of February 2017, he discovered his claim for asylum had been refused and certified the month previously without him being notified. At 43, I read from paragraph 43, the Home Office records for the 3rd of March state, given that his mental health condition has been recognised by his GP and he is awaiting dates for counselling, I believe it is not appropriate to detain the applicant today, but allow him the opportunity for counselling and hopefully amelioration of his problems. I have not entered him on special conditions as AAR2, Adults at Risk Level 2. And he says at 44 to 45 that the internal notes show that following pre-verification checks, a referral to the detention gatekeeper was made. On the 28th of March 2017, A. Begum, the detention gatekeeper, sought approval for considering D2077 as risk level 2 by email from the detention gatekeeper duty CEO. A. Begum's notes state, can this case be reviewed and authorised for level 2? Vulnerability. On the referral form, the ICE team states that the subject is level 3 AAR, suffers from depression and anxiety, previous release on Rule 35 grounds, under special conditions, and also states the GP is arranging counselling for applicant's mental health condition. Due to subject's health and previous release on Rule 35 grounds, can we accept this case? At paragraphs 46 to 50, D2077 summarises the evidence disclosed as to the decision to detain him in the relevant period. The disclosure shows that the judgment that he had level 3 evidence under the Adults at Risk policy in view of his scarring, history of self-harm and suicide and previous release following a Rule 35 report was reassessed so as to categorise the evidence as level 2, allowing him to be detained. Removal directions marked not for disclosure were proposed to be set for the 11th of April 2017, with a plan made to detain him for the 12 days beforehand. I'm returning to the statement and read from paragraphs 51 to 56. As a consequence, I was re-detained when reporting in Sheffield on the 31st of March 2017. I did not understand what was happening. They were saying things to me, but I didn't understand them as my English was not that good. I was so terrified about what was going to happen next. I believe there was a telephone interpreter who spoke to me briefly, who said I was going to be removed. Officers then put handcuffs on me. I had no idea why. I believe there were 3 or 4 officers who restrained me. I did not show any reaction or resist in any way. I was frozen with stress and couldn't move. I was so scared. This was like a bad nightmare for me. I was first taken to a police station and then on to Campsfield House IRC in Oxford. I was left hungry and thirsty in the back of a closed prison-type van. I felt that the worst thing was happening to me. I was suffering from severe anxiety, heart palpitations and stress. On the 31st of March 2017, my legal representative sent a fax to the Home Office 3rd Country Unit expressing grave reservations about my re-detention on the grounds that I was a victim of torture. They explained that I had previously been released from detention after a Rule 35 report and that I was suicidal and undergoing medical treatment. They enclosed a medical report of the 17th of February 2017 from Dr. Byrne, a retired GP, who had been assisting me outside detention, which said, "In my view, D2077 is suffering with severe psychological trauma, secondary to the torture he suffered in Iran. He has been monitored on a weekly to 2-weekly basis by us due to his vulnerability and severe depression. He has mentioned multiple times that he would end his life if he is deported to Germany. He already attempted suicide 3 months ago. In my view, he is quite depressed." On arrival at Campsfield, I had a short meeting where I told my interviewer that I was a victim of torture and I was on medication for my mental health. At 57, D2077 summarises his medical notes from Campsfield House, which show he was on medication and depressed but considered fit for detention. He was referred for a mental health assessment and a Rule 35 was booked for Tuesday the 4th of April 2017. At 58 to 65, he goes into more detail about the medical evidence and the attempts made by his solicitors and doctors in the community to secure appropriate medical treatment and release from detention in light of the harm it was causing and the risk of suicide. He was transferred to Brook House prior to the completion of a Rule 35, and on the day he was due to see the doctor provided by Medical Justice. I read from 66 to 72 of his statement. I was taken again in a closed van and had my arms cuffed. Again, I did not understand why they were doing this to me. This time I do not even remember a telephone interpreter saying anything. I thought they were just going to take me straight to a plane. They did not tell me anything about why I was being moved. I felt the world was collapsing around me. I did not see any hope for being alive at the time. I couldn't believe it was happening again. I was transferred with 2 elderly European men. I just remember driving and not knowing the destination. It was very traumatic for me. I felt like I was being treated like a serious and dangerous criminal. I just had to obey what they told me to do. I was so scared of what would happen if I resisted. I had too much fear to do anything other than what they asked me to do. I understand that a 7-day detention review was conducted on the 7th of April 2017. This noted that there would be no escorts available to remove me until May 2017, that I was considered an absconder risk because I had indicated I was unwilling to leave the UK, and that despite being assessed as a victim of torture and suicide risk, and my representative's letters expressing concern about this detention had been kept to a minimum. On the 8th of April 2017, an injunction was granted by the court preventing my removal to Germany, but I was still not released from detention. An internal Home Office minute for the 12th of April 2017 by A. Patel records that I was again considered a safeguarding level 3 case, and the case was referred to safeguarding officers for further action, but I still remained detained at Brook House for a further 9 days with my mental health getting worse. On arrival at Brook House, D2077 was then held in a small room by himself, and a nurse noted he had previously attempted to self-harm and was feeling low as he had not had access to medication for a week. And I read from paragraphs 75 to 85. I had been detained in 2 other detention centres, but I felt that environment at Brook House was far more oppressive and far harsher. They weren't even comparable in my eyes. I felt that at other detention centres the guards and the regime were more relaxed and there was more respect. You were not locked up for such long periods and herded back to your cells and made to queue up like animals for food. For example, at Campsfield, you could go up when you were ready and choose between different kinds of food. In contrast, I remember at Brook House the choice was extremely limited and the food was just sickening to me. You all had to stand in a line with your plate to be given disgusting food. At Campsfield, in the day, you were allowed to go outside whenever you wanted to, and there were grounds and grass that you could lie on. In Brook House, you'd only have a short period outside to get some fresh air. The other centres had better facilities that were easier to access. I do not remember being able to do anything at all. You could not distract yourself from where you were. I shared a room with another person. There were 2 beds in the room and a toilet in the corner. There was a kettle in the room and was just extremely dirty. For example, if we ate something, we just had to put everything in the bin and it would stay there until we were allowed outside. The bin would overflow. From the IRC records, I am told that this was Clyde Wing Room 011. The centre was generally dirty. The rooms were filthy as they weren't cleaned or cared for properly. At other detention centres, they would tell you to leave whilst they cleaned the rooms, but they didn't do that at Brook House. The walls and the doors were very old and dirty. Many people had stayed there before. The sheets were very old and used, and looked as if they had been used many times beforehand. The beds had been ruined through years of use and were extremely uncomfortable. They were very difficult to sleep in. I remember the toilets were extremely old and dirty. They were stained and dirty, and there were lots of germs in them. We were not able easily to get products to clean the toilet, and nobody did this for me. There was no ventilation, so it smelt bad. We had to keep going to ask for supplies for soap and shampoo. They would just give us enough for one, and then we would have to go back again. The room reminded me of a cage for animals. There was a mirror in the corner of the room, so that when you were in the toilet, it could be seen what you were doing. There was no privacy, and officers would always be there. It felt extremely restrictive and insecure. It did not feel that even dangerous criminals should be treated like this. Fortunately, the other detainee who I was with was Iranian, and he was helpful, and he was kind to me. Even so, I could not cope in there. The environment in IRC Brook House was completely toxic and oppressive. People had serious mental health issues. There were frequent self-harm and suicide attempts. It seemed as if almost every day someone had hurt themselves. I found this very alarming and distressing. I'll summarise 86 to 89, where D2077 explains the guards appeared full of hate, and the atmosphere was very intimidating. It felt like they did not care about welfare or health. It seemed as if detainees would go crazy because they were kept inside for so long, with no opportunity to use their energy in other ways. And then 90 and read from 91. When I was locked in at night, we had nothing to do. We could only think and worry. I would have really terrible flashbacks, reminding me of what happened when I was tortured in Iran. Every night I was worried that someone would come and tie me up and take me elsewhere. And from 95 onwards, when people felt that they were being ignored, they would bang on their doors over and over again. When people did this, the noise would just echo. However, the officers would still just ignore the noise, but it would be very distressing. At night, you would also hear the screams from other detainees who were desperate and self-harmed. I remember hearing this every day. I saw blood in a cell and in the hallway. However, nobody seemed to care. The officers didn't react to the blood. The night before flights, people would be especially noisy, and many would shout and scream all night. I could hear their noises up until morning, and they were physically taken away. I'm aware that if someone did not want to go, the officers would restrain them and drag them along the floor. We heard what was happening in terror. You would not see the people the next day, and you would know that they had been deported. I was always worried that this would happen to me. It would make my stress increase every time I heard it. As well as my mental anguish, I couldn't sleep because of all the noises, the sounds of the other detainees, the banging, the cell bells and thumping of footsteps. Being locked in at night just felt like suffocation. It was as if there was something heavy on my chest. I just wanted something to distract me from the pain and anxiety that I was in, but there was nothing there. This is one of the worst things that I could imagine happening to me. Every night I felt that I was near death. I felt that death was better than what was happening to me. At least I would not be living in fear anymore, and I would escape my nightmares. Food refusal protests. On the 9th of April 2017, I stopped eating. I did not want to eat or drink, and instead I just smoked and took medication. I had no interest in taking care of myself when these people didn't care about me. Although I had been told that my removal to Germany was stopped, I was still kept in detention after the 7th of April. I was very confused and in despair about this. If I did not have a flight, I should not have been detained. I did not trust anything or anyone that I was told because of this. I was fearful they would remove me regardless. I did not trust the Home Office to follow the rules. I became more and more worried as time passed, and they didn't make a decision to release me. I originally thought the court would help me, but I began to think the Home Office had so much power they could ignore what the courts had to say and do whatever they want to me. I felt there were personal issues against me, and I was being deliberately harmed. On the 9th of April 2017, Sorry. On the 9th of April 2017, I stitched my mouth together with thread. I had previously stitched my mouth together as a protest while I was in the Calais jungle. I knew how dangerous and painful it was, but I did it out of desperation and because I no longer cared whether I lived or died. Before this, nobody was taking any notice of me and the physical and mental pain I was going through. I felt as if I had no other choice. It couldn't get any worse than this, and I could not cope being in detention any longer. I was forced to do it to try and get someone to see how I was suffering and to get me out of there before I ended my life. I understand that an officer was notified by another detainee that I had done this to my lips on the 9th of April 2017. It says the officer found me in my room lying with a scarf on my face, having not eaten and having sewn my lips together in protest against my treatment by the Home Office and the despair I was feeling. I was assessed by healthcare, but I did not agree to have the thread on my lips cut. D2077 explains where he was held and what forms of supervision were provided. And I read from 109 to 116. There was a 14-day detention review on the 13th of April, but detention was maintained. It notes I was on constant supervision after going on hunger strike and sewing my lips together. However, the decision maker simply notes detention remains appropriate because I was considered an absconder risk. No consideration was given to how long I would spend in detention or whether it was causing me harm. After transfer to isolation, 2 guards were at first watching me 24/7. The guards had different shifts, so they would change every so often. They were always there watching me, even when I was on the toilet. This was humiliating. At night, they would frequently come with a torchlight and flash it on me. I was scared that if I fell asleep, they would tie me up and then take me somewhere. It was very frightening and preventing me from sleeping properly. I was very uncomfortable when I was always being observed. It felt that someone was always controlling me. When you are in isolation, you lose any freedom that you might have had. It felt like it was extra pressure inside the walls. It was inhumane. My stress and anxiety were out of control. I eventually stitched my lips on the 14th of April because of the advice that I was given by my lawyer and my people who were trying to help me. I was really worried that if I stopped my protests, they would decide that now was the opportunity to send me back. I believed this to be true until the last moment before I was released from the centre. On the 16th of April, I was taken back to A Wing, room 102, until release on the 21st of April 2017, but I remained under close observations, starting at hourly, then reducing to every 3 hours. I was released from detention on the 21st of April 2017. D2077 notes that a medical report of Dr. Ibrahimi of Medical Justice set out in detail the mental health consequences for D2077, including depression, anxiety, psychological and physical symptoms, and paranoia, often when feeling very anxious and when people were talking English around him and he could not understand what they were saying. He was reporting significant preoccupations in his thoughts with suicidal ideations, and thought being quite significant and having worsened recently. He also mentioned recurrent and ongoing thoughts and flashback to the torture and abuse he has reported. He stated these thoughts and flashbacks were at their worst in recent days. He describes many triggers such as loud noises, shouting, hearing footsteps, and the doors being opened and locked in the IRC. At 118, Dr. Ibrahimi's opinion is set out to the effect that D2077's detention was exacerbating and worsening his mental health and escalating the risk of suicide, and that he should not be detained. The psychiatric and psychotherapeutic treatment available in detention was inadequate given his multiple diagnoses and vulnerability. At 119 to 121, he sets out his experience of Brook House guards, stating they were often disrespectful and making fun of people. They often seemed sarcastic angry, and they had no empathy towards us. It makes you feel less than human when someone is speaking to you like this, but you cannot understand. It made me feel very paranoid and uncomfortable. And at 122 he says, I left my own country because my life was in danger from the police and the security services in Iran. My experiences with the officers in Brook House made me think they didn't care about my rights either. I now have refugee status, but I cannot feel that I am fully protected and safe. I still feel scared. I have lost any trust in the system to protect me.
Mr. Goodman,
Yeah.
can I just ask, I'm just conscious that we are going slightly over, which
Yeah.
is fine, and obviously you have a little bit more flexibility today, but just as an approximation, how much longer do you think you will need?
It looks to me to be about 8 minutes, if you wouldn't mind,
Fine.
Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Although D2770 did not experience physical violence, he would hear aggression used towards others when they were being taken away, and he assumed for a deportation flight. And at 127 he says, for example, when they forcibly restrained people and tied their hands up, they would drag them on the ground to be taken away. On one occasion I saw 3 to 4 officers congregate outside a young Afghan man's room before getting him. His room was close to mine, so I could see them prepare for this. I could hear the screams whilst it was happening. People would scream in pain and distress, but they would not stop doing this. This made my own stress increase. I was worried all the time that it would happen to me. At 131, he says, when I was detained previously at Tinsley House IRC in 2016, I was released because I had a Rule 35-3 report which confirmed I was a victim of torture. And I was released shortly afterwards because of it. However, the Home Office obviously did not follow and acknowledge that I had this assessment previously because they detained me again in 2017. It was clear to me that the rules must not have been working properly. Nothing had changed since I had last been detained. I was still a victim of torture and I was still suicidal. A doctor had said that I was not fit for detention previously and I was not fit for detention this time. I should not have gone through the horrors of detention again. I believed that this country was different to my home country of Iran and that they would follow the rules here. However, this incident proved to me that this wasn't the case. Whilst I was in detention, I asked for a new Rule 35 assessment to show that detention was not good for me, but they refused to do this because I had won previously. I tried to tell them about my injuries and show them my paperwork, but they didn't care. I said repeatedly that I had been tortured and that I was dying and I hurt myself. From 9th of April 2017, I was not eating and taking medication on an empty stomach. I was causing serious damage to myself, however they didn't care. If they cared, they would have addressed my mental health problems and released me from detention. I'm going to summarise at 135 to 139. He summarises his mental health conditions and explains the lack of concern of the guards towards both himself and others, noting in particular an incident where an Arabic man cut himself so badly his tendon was showing, but the guards were just watching. He believes this happened on E-Wing in the canteen after he'd been in Brook House for about 2 weeks. He believes the guards were laughing at him and others looked at him like an animal in the zoo. At 143 to 147, he explains his belief that he did not receive appropriate medical care and why he had no confidence in the healthcare system, including occasions when he was ignored when asking for medication. And I read from 148. I believe it took 3 to 5 days before I was given a low dosage of the same medication I was on at the previous detention centre and in the community. They had taken my medication away from me when I was transferred to Brook House, and they said they would return it when I arrived. However, they did not do this. They said they didn't have any evidence that I was on this level of the medication, but when they received this evidence, they would change my dose. They did not genuinely care about our health. I constantly had issues with my medication. I had to request it directly. It was never just provided for me. They knew that I needed the medication at the same time every day, but it just wasn't done. It was more difficult for me as I couldn't advocate for myself as I couldn't speak English. I often had to ask someone to help me. I was not allowed to have my medication on me at the centre, so it meant I had to queue to see them every day to get my medication. This was a constant reminder of their lack of care. My medical records show that on the 10th of April 2017, I told the mental health nurse Karen Churcher that I would keep my mouth sewn until release. Also present were Duty Director D. Houghton and DCMS Dix. I have been referred to a note saying that I would be spoken to about my objective. I am shown my medical notes, which record Dr. Uzerali stating that he saw me on E-Wing on the 10th of April and that he would speak to me tomorrow to understand my objective. I do not remember speaking to him again. He knew I was a victim of torture and that I wanted to harm myself. However, he did not care. He didn't even ensure that I got my medication properly. I remember there was one nurse who mocked me after I sewed my lips together. She told me that I would need to unsew my lips together, otherwise I wouldn't get given my medication. I do not remember the name of the nurse, but I remember that she was young, had red curly hair, and she was white. I felt she was particularly cruel to me. On the 12th of April 2017, I spoke to Jo Buss, a staff nurse, in the presence of a DCO, who I told the Home Office were not responding to my solicitors, that I would unsew my lips the following day, and that I wanted to speak to a doctor about a Rule 35. But no Rule 35 was undertaken. My hunger strike lasted for about 10 days. My stomach really couldn't take food anyway, so I only started eating again properly after I was released from the detention centre. I continued to have difficulty eating for some time afterwards. I did not know whether the healthcare staff I did not know what the healthcare staff were thinking. I don't think they believed I was genuinely unwell. I was not eating and I was physically harming myself, but I still felt as though I was treated by healthcare like a criminal or a murderer. I did not remember any doctors and nurses showed any care or decency towards me. I felt their belief was that their responsibility was to the Home Office rather than caring for detainees. And he then explains he was not aware of any complaints process and that even if he had been, he would not have been confident to use it. And he explains at 161 to 164 that by the time he was released, he had lost all hope and faith in the system. He finds it painful that the Home Office totally disregard my history of torture and my mental illness and downgraded the risks of me being detained, but then held me for longer because of my mental health problems. He notes the decisions drove him mad and to despair. In his words, 5 days is a long time in Brook House when you are suffering as I was in such a terrible place and surrounded by fear, violence, disturbance and distress. After release from detention, D2077 continued to experience significant fear and anxiety at an extreme level, particularly when reporting. Even now, the noise of sirens would make his teeth lock, body shiver and legs become numb. He explains that being in Brook House IRC made him remember and relive the experiences of being detained and tortured in Iran. The final paragraph I'm going to read out is 171. At least when I was in prison in Iran, guards were speaking the same language to me, so I knew what was going to happen to me. In Brook House, I did not know what was going to happen to me, so I constantly feared the worst. And he then summarises the report of Dr. Thomas, recording various factors related to the deterioration of his mental health in detention, and explains at 174 to 178 how he did not recover from detention, and that it's important to him to speak out about what happened to him in Brook House, but the experiences were very damaging. And although the Home Office has conceded that they detained him unlawfully and paid him damages, they have not apologised. And for that reason, he wanted to give evidence to this inquiry with a hope that real change can be made so that individuals are not detained and treated like him again. And he signs his statement with a statement of truth. And then there's a chronology of events appended to his witness statement that sets out the history in more detail. Madam Chair, one further point. If I return to D523, at the end of his statement summary was a list of documents, which a table, which has been agreed by the inquiry would be adduced, and rather than read it out, we just refer you on.
I do have it. Thank you, Mr. Brook.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Lee, I believe we're hearing from you on behalf of D1538.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, please. I'm just going to take the lectern, if I may.
Sure,
Thank you.
no worries.
Thank you, Chair. In a similar way to the previous evidence, I'm going to read some of the witness statement verbatim and summarise other parts of it. Hopefully you have both the witness statement and the notes.
I do, thank you.
Similarly to Mr. Goodman, at the back of the notes there's quite a long table of documents, and similarly it's been agreed that rather than read those out, we can take those as adduced because they're there.
Indeed, thank you.
This, Chair, is the witness statement of D1538. It begins with a statement of truth. Paragraphs 2 to 4 I shall read. I was born in Morocco to a conservative family. The Home Office dispute my age and have previously made me to undertake an age assessment. I left Morocco due to violent physical and verbal mistreatment at the hands of my family and strangers. I suffered regular physical abuse from my father as a child, including being subject to a severe beating by him after I dropped out of school. I was also the victim of repeated drugging by 3 older boys over a period of 3 months. After my family discovered that I'd been abused in this way, my father attacked me severely, leaving me homeless. Whilst living on the streets as a child, I was attacked by members of the public. I have scars as a result of this mistreatment, as recorded in my Rule 35 report, which records incision scars on forearms and lower back, laceration scars on top of head and forehead. I also suffered verbal abuse while living on the streets. These traumatic experiences impacted hugely on my mental health. I've been diagnosed with severe major depressive disorder with psychotic features, dissociative disorder stemming in part from the emotional and physical abuse I suffered as a child. Paragraphs 5 to 6, D1538 sets out how he entered the UK in 2014 and was detained at Brook House IRC for 3 periods in 2017, including between the 1st of June and 14th of June 2017 and 27th of June and 15th of July 2017. He was subsequently detained at 3 other detention centres in 2017. At paragraph 7, he describes that prior to his detention in the relevant period, he was detained under immigration periods for 3 other periods. He states that he was taken to Brook House on the afternoon of the 1st of June 2017. Paragraphs 8 and 9, he describes the process of claiming asylum shortly after his first period of detention at Brook House. He goes on to say at paragraph 10, my experiences in detention, including assault and mistreatment by officers, have impacted severely on my mental health. My 4 periods in immigration detention worsened my existing mental health issues significantly, and I have still not recovered from the impact that detention had on my mental well-being. I try my best to forget what happened to me in detention. Every time I bring back these old memories of my period in detention, of what happened to me, it makes me feel really tired, really uncomfortable. It upsets me. I found the process of providing even this statement for the inquiry very difficult. What I experienced in Brook House affected me in a deeply emotional way. I feel I'm not a full human, not a full person anymore. My behaviour has radically changed. I can't really interact well with people anymore. I've come out of detention a different person. I was left with emotional scars from my experience. I've experienced many very difficult things in my life, but my time in detention centres was the worst. It was the hardest thing to survive. I was tortured in Morocco, and I was tortured again here by the immigration detention system. Then to summarise paragraphs 16 to 24. He describes arriving at Brook House at night at around 10:30. He describes feeling very stressed and cannot remember having an induction. D1538 states that he saw a nurse and refers to the relevant entry in his medical notes. He does not recall being asked anything about his mental health, self-harm or suicide. There was no interpreter provided, and it was not easy for him to communicate about complex issues in English. However, he did raise concerns about an injury to his head, but said that they did not seem to be paying much attention to him. D1538 also describes having an appointment the following day with a doctor, and again refers to the relevant entry in his medical notes. He describes the appointment as a basic medical checkup. He states that he was not asked about his scars or mental health issues. He says he was told that he should discuss any other complaints in a separate appointment. At paragraphs 25 to 39, he states that he was accommodated on B Wing for around 4 days, but before being accommodated on A wing in a 2-person cell. He had 2 cellmates during June and July 2017. Initially, he preferred to share a cell, but he later preferred a cell alone for hygiene reasons, and he wanted to feel safe in his own space. He describes the lack of privacy and embarrassment surrounding the use of the toilet in the cell. He also describes being locked in overnight and at other times during the daytime. Lock-in reminded D1538 of his experience of living on the streets in Morocco, sometimes in cardboard boxes. It was cramped, smelly, noisy, and very scary. D1538 also describes spending time on E-wing. He hated being put in isolation and states that it seemed to him that officers used Rule 40 as a punishment, a response to minor annoyances. He states it affected him badly. He states that officers would often put people with mental health issues under Rule 40. He then discusses the limited activities available at Brook House. D1538 states that he would only be given access to an interpreter when he had an appointment with Home Office staff. For every other interaction, he would have to speak English, but he needed an interpreter to understand everything that was said to him clearly and to convey what he wanted to say in full. He says he requested an interpreter on several occasions at Brook House, including for healthcare appointments, but none was available. He also describes how it could take 2 or 3 weeks to meet with a solicitor after attending the legal advice surgery. Paragraph 40 goes on to say, throughout my time in detention at Brook House IRC and in other centres, I suffered mistreatment from staff and was treated unfairly. One example of this were the events of 6th of June 2017, where I was subjected to a very violent and frightening attack by another detained person, and was then restrained by 3 officers before being sent to E-wing. There is CCTV footage of this incident at Disc 55, 6th of June 2017, and footage from Callum Tully's camera at V 2017 060 6000011, clip 1. A summary of paragraphs 41 and 49 are as follows. D1538 describes being in the arts and crafts room when an argument started between 2 detainees, one of whom was D197, about a chair. D1538 told D197 to stop speaking because he was, but then D197 began to swear at him. D197 left the room and returned soon afterwards carrying a bag. D197 then attacked D1538 with a metal stick or pipe. D1538 felt he was in serious danger and needed to defend himself. The incident was captured on CCTV. D1538 describes that when DCO Ryan Bromley and DCM Nick London entered the room, they held his arms behind his back instead of focusing on D197. Picking up the witness statement again at paragraph 50. Then from nowhere an officer grabbed my head. This meant I could barely breathe. I was being strangled. It felt like the officer was fighting with my head. They held me very tight. It was painful. This made the situation a lot worse, and it made me feel even more frustrated and upset. I understand from my solicitors that this officer is named DCM Steve Farrell. At paragraph 52, the use of force reports written by DCM Nick London, DCO Ryan Bromley and DCM Shane Farrell do not accurately represent the reasons for DCM Farrell grabbing my head. A summary of paragraphs 53 and 54. D1538 notes that the undercover footage does not appear to support the justification given in the use of force documentation by all 3 officers, namely that the restraint was to prevent him hitting his head on nearby cabinets. He states that the footage shows there was not a filing cabinet near him prior to the intervention, and the restraint placed him at a greater danger of hitting his head or otherwise injuring himself. Back to the witness statement at paragraphs 55 and 56. DCM Shane Farrell released my head briefly when I fell and then grabbed it again. It appears from reviewing the CCTV footage that DCM Shane Farrell grabbed my head for a second time following a physical prompting from another manager placing his hands on Farrell's shoulders, CPS 000059, which appears to be BBC internal notes on the footage secretly taken by Callum Tully, states Dean Breckenridge is the one who pushes Shane in to restrain the head again. And in Callum Tully's video diary he says, and even once he's released control of the guy's head, even once he's out of the headlock, another manager comes in and just pushes him into the detainee once more, encouraging him to do it again. And he takes encouragement. He grabs his head for a second time. During the restraint, I understand from the transcripts that the other detainees present started shouting at the officers to stop, although I cannot recall this. At the time, my whole focus was on myself and on what was being done to me by the officers. And paragraphs 57, D1538 then quotes from the transcript, including one other detained person saying, "Yo, yo, yo, leave him, man," and "So don't grab him like that. Don't grab his head, man. What did he do?" Paragraph 58, summarised as D1538, states that none of the officers intervened to stop DCM Farrell, despite D1538's resistance to the restraint and the fact that other detainees were telling the officers to stop grabbing his head. He says that all the other officers did was tell D1538 to calm down or tell the other detainees to leave. Picking up the statement again at paragraph 59, my legal representatives have read me the transcripts where Ryan Bromley says to Callum Tully, "He took his head clean off. They pulled him, pulled his neck right down. That's why even D197's mate were like," inaudible, "but they're the ones that fight him," referring to DCM Farrell's grab of my head. In Brook House, there was so much violence, so much force from officers, all to control people. It does not surprise me that officers would talk about restraint of a person like this. I believe Ryan Bromley's description supports my account that the force was for no good reason and was violent. In summary of paragraphs 60 and 61, D1538 notes that in Callum Tully's video diaries, he stated of the incident, "I felt, when Shane came in and grabbed his head, that it didn't seem proportionate to the risk and was unnecessary. One thing that Ryan did say was that he almost took his head off. The second attempt did seem to be a bit more heavy-handed. Let's say, it's not just me that thinks Shane was harsh in the restraint. Ryan feels that way as well. And management, all too often, resort to it very, very quickly, without de-escalating the situation. And so clearly, not just Shane, but the staff around think that's what he's done, is an acceptable thing to do." He also notes that Callum Tully stated in the video diary of the attack on him by D197, quotes, "He was attacked, and it was completely unprovoked." Further, Callum Tully stated that at the time of the headlock, D1538 had not been posing a risk to staff or anyone else. Okay, back to the statement at paragraph 62 to 65. I agree with the assessment by Callum Tully that the force used by DCM Shane Farrell was unnecessary and excessive. It actually made the situation worse, as it made me feel threatened and in danger once again. It caused me to fall over, and it made me more frustrated and indignant. I experienced a lot of abuse and mistreatment during my periods in detention, and I'm not surprised at this behaviour from a DCM. I disagree with Steve Loughton's statement in the use of force report that, quote, "minimal force was used to prevent any further assault." I understand that the comments provided by DCO Ryan Bromley indicate he also saw the force as excessive. Despite this, he did nothing during the restraint to stop DCM Shane Farrell, and my legal representatives inform me that his use of force report does not raise concerns about the head grab. I'm not surprised by this, as my experience in detention was that officers would lie about the use of force or abuse of detainees. I go into this in further detail below when I address my experience of the Professional Standards Unit, PSU. I remember being taken to a manager's office after this incident. I stated that I wanted a police investigation, which is recorded in the shift handover notes a few days after the incident on 8th of June 2017. quotes. D197 moved to Eden Wing, awaiting update from police, as detainee D1538 wanted incident reported to police, as he says he was assaulted by D197. The manager refused to report the incident to the police during my meeting with him. I do not know why, and I do not know why the incident report states Mr. D1538 does not want the police involved in this incident. I did. I was seriously injured by the attack. I had scratches on my neck, bruising and a swollen eye. A report of the injury by healthcare records that I suffered from, quote, scratches on his neck, both sides over the right eye, slightly swollen back of his neck, tiny scratch, fit and well. And summarise paragraphs 66 and 67. D1538 was checked twice by a nurse following the incident, once on E-Wing and once on the return to his cell. But he says that on the basis of his records, it appears he did not receive any medical treatment for his injuries. D1538 was taken to isolation. He does not recall being given a reason for being put in isolation. Back to the witness statement, Chair, paragraph 68. I felt that this was unfair. I was not being treated like a human being. I was the victim of an attack by another detained person and by the officers, but I was being told to go onto isolation to calm down. I felt like I was being punished. There were several witnesses, including the arts and crafts teacher Sarah Walpole, who would have been able to immediately confirm that I was the victim. In paragraph 71, this event left me feeling traumatised. For a while I couldn't speak to anyone. I couldn't laugh, I couldn't cry, I was in a state of shock. The impact was worsened because I suffered physical abuse from detained persons and staff a number of times throughout my time in detention. There is a cumulative impact to this, which means that I think about the incidents a lot and find it difficult to forget what happened to me. I do not think the force, restraint used by DCM Shane Farrell was reasonable and proportionate at all. It was totally unprovoked and it did not help the situation. It made me a lot more frustrated, stressed and scared. DCOs Nick London and Ryan Bromley were already holding my arms to hold me back. Suddenly and violently pulling my head and putting me in a headlock was not justified. I do not understand why the officers state in their accounts that they did this to protect my head from hitting it on cabinets. There were no cabinets nearby, and I was not thrashing my head when DCM Shane Farrell initially grabbed my head, and his decision to do so put me in more danger. At paragraph 73, the summary is D1538 states that the incident was not investigated by the PSU because it was not included in his complaint letter. And back to the witness statement at paragraph 74. Another event, which has had a lasting impact on me during my time in detention, was when I witnessed my cellmate attempt to kill himself by tying a ligature around his neck and hanging it from a TV bracket. I do not remember the name of my cellmate, but the transcripts indicate he was called D865 and was an Algerian. On the 4th of July 2017, I went to the bathroom and I heard a huge crash. I came out and the TV had fallen from the wall. My cellmate was lying on the floor, shaking, with something around his neck, I think shoelaces. It looked like he'd tied the material around the TV bracket and his neck whilst I was in the bathroom. It was so distressing that I found it hard to look at him. I felt very scared. I started to call for help. I rang the bell. Staff finally arrived after a long wait of several minutes and they took him to the monitoring room. Summarise paragraph 78. In the witness statement, D1538 then sets out the transcript of the incident. And at paragraph 79 to 82, he says he was asked to see, he asked to see a doctor immediately as he was feeling scared and disturbed. Instead, he saw a mental health nurse and describes feeling shaken. D1538 notes that while his medical notes suggest he was being booked in for a follow-up appointment, which he did not attend, he cannot remember being off at that appointment. He suggests that this may be because he forgot or did not realise he had the appointment due to being so shaken and disturbed by what he had witnessed. His medical notes also record him attending an emotional healthcare group. although documents show that D1538 was placed on, quote, raised concern, close quotes, after this incident, he cannot recall any special treatment or support. He was not placed on ACDT. Back to the witness statement, Chair, at paragraph 83. I was deeply shaken after witnessing my cellmate's attempted suicide and suffered from nightmares and intrusive thoughts about it. I was not able to sleep at all for a few days after this happened and continued to experience disturbed sleep. I can still remember how he looked lying on the floor, and I'm haunted by an image in my mind of him hanging from the TV bracket. Paragraph 84, summarised as D1538's medical records show that he was still experiencing these symptoms a month later whilst he was being detained at Harmondsworth. Paragraph 85. This was a very traumatic experience and I'm still tormented by images of it. I feel that staff should have provided me with more support and looked after me. It would have been good to have one-to-one speaking therapy, for example. I feel like I was left alone to deal with this very difficult incident, mostly by myself. The impact of this event on me is also recorded in Dr. Turville's MLR report. Quote, the attempted suicide of a roommate has had a debilitating effect upon D1538 and may have re-traumatised him. I witnessed my cellmate try to hurt himself several times. I saw him cut himself many times. I saw him using blades to hurt himself. I would speak to him and try and stop him, try to take away the blade. He would also bang his head on the cell. I saw him put a plastic bag over his head in an attempt to suffocate himself. So I'm going to summarise paragraphs 89 to 111 as follows. D1538 describes that his solicitors submitted a complaint regarding an incident on the 3rd of June 2017 which occurred in the computer room and an incident on the 28th of June 2017 during which homophobic comments were made about him. D1538 then goes on to describe those incidents. On 3rd of June 2017, he describes being denied the use of a computer and then a verbal altercation developing between him and an officer. Another officer joined the first officer and then pushed D1538 twice. D1538 was sent to isolation following the incident and he was barred from the IT suite for a week. The officers were identified as DCO Edmund Fiddy and DCO Luke Instone Brewer. D1538 is not aware of whether the police were notified about the matter. He did not complain about the incident at the time, as he did not feel he could trust any of the staff to keep the complaint confidential, and he also did not trust them to make any changes as a result. The PSU found D1538's complaint unsubstantiated. D1538, however, points out that the CCTV did not record the audio of the conversation. He also states that the PSU approached the investigation with the assumption that the officers were telling the truth. D1538 makes the point that the same officers were frequently involved in incidents of mistreatment of detainees. On the 28th of June 2017, D1538 states that he was walking over to C Wing to borrow some clothes from another detainee, as he only had a t-shirt and shorts. An officer told D1538 that he was not allowed to go to C Wing and that he should change his clothes because he, quote, looked gay. D1538 describes being terrified about what the other detainees would think and how they would react. They laughed and teased D1538. They mocked him for days afterwards. D1538 could not believe a detention officer would speak to him like that. The officer has been identified as DCO Tomsit, who was later promoted to DCM. Again, the PSU found D1538's complaint unsubstantiated. He states that they took DCM Tomsit's evidence at face value. He points out that DCM Tomsit had been involved in a wide number of instances of racism towards detainees and gives examples from the documents. Now summarise paragraphs 112 to 129 as follows. D1538 then discusses the process of making complaints and refers to some confusion between G4S and the Home Office as to who ought to have been investigating the complaints. D1538 was not provided with the full PSU investigation report until it was disclosed in the judicial review which led to this inquiry. D1538 is not satisfied with the findings of the PSU investigation. He states that he believes that the staff all work together to protect their reputation and to try to prevent him from obtaining proper redress. He also states that the staff did not tell the truth in their reports about events. Of the Home Office, he states that they do not want people to know about their failures or see their officers at fault. He states that they want to project an image that officers are good and detainees are bad. D1538 points out that none of the staff involved in the incidents which were investigated were even interviewed. He states that he would have liked his complaint to be taken seriously and for justice to be done, saying, "The worst thing is when you know you are a victim and still you receive punishment."
Mr. Lee, can I just interrupt you? Excuse me briefly. We obviously have run slightly over when we anticipated. I'm just wondering if people might like a quick 5-minute comfort break. How long do you think you have left?
I think I've got slightly less than a minute.
Oh, right, okay.
Maybe less than 2 minutes, shall I
Okay,
say?
that's
Shall I say
fine. Please continue. Thank you
okay,
very
that's
much.
it. So summarising paragraphs 130 to 136, D1538 states that it was very difficult to get access to healthcare at Brook House and describes healthcare as very dismissive. Despite D1538 raising concerns about headaches since arriving at Brook House and on subsequent occasions, he states that no further investigations were ever conducted. D1538 describes that the only thing healthcare would ever do is provide a tablet to help with sleeping or paracetamol, but nothing specific to the problem. Paragraphs 137 to 141 can be summarised as: D1538 states that he asked for a Rule 35 report whilst at Brook House, but it was not done. He does not know why. When he asked a doctor during an appointment, he simply refused. D1538 finally received a Rule 35 report on the 24th of July 2017. The doctor concluded that he may be a victim of torture. However, the doctor did not record D1538's scars on a body map and failed to make any record of the scars on his legs. Furthermore, the report failed to make an assessment of D1538's mental health and the impact of detention on him. The report is not signed. The Home Office responded to the report and stated that D1538 would be kept in detention, which reinforced D1538's sense that he was being treated unfairly and that the Home Office did not care. My 2 minutes is probably classic council's estimate of time. I think I've got about 2 or 3 minutes left because there's a part to read, but I can.
I think unless anybody is desperate for a break, then I think we continue.
I'm grateful.
Thank you very much.
Paragraphs 145 to 151 can be summarised as D1538 describes the situation with drugs at Brook House. He saw people using spice frequently and witnessed the negative effects of the same. He describes that on one occasion he was provided with a cigarette, which he smoked, not knowing that it had spice in it. He did not report drug use to staff because he did not believe staff would act on his reports of it, and also because he was in fear of being labelled as a snitch by other detainees. D1538 did not know how drugs got into Brook House, but states that officers turned a blind eye to their use. This is returning to the witness statement, paragraph 166. Paragraph 161, I should say. My experience of Brook House in comparison to other detention centres is different, better in some ways and worse in others. For example, in one centre, another detainee broke my nose. That was very scary, as it happened when I was alone in my cell. In another detention centre near Heathrow, there were bed bugs in my cell. I had bites from them when I was sleeping. They were all over the cell, in the blankets. It was horrible. However, drug abuse at Brook House was the worst I witnessed in any detention centre. I did see people using drugs in other IRCs, but it was most prevalent at Brook House. People did it out of despair, to forget the terrible situation they found themselves in. I also think that the treatment of detainees by staff in Brook House was particularly bad. There was a handful of kind staff, but I found the majority of them to be rude and prone to violence. When staff spoke to you, the default was not courtesy, it was usually to shout at you or to be rude and dismissive. This made detained men more likely to respond in kind, leading to a hostile, angry atmosphere. I believe the treatment of detainees was worse at Brook House in part because the detention centre focuses on charter flights and removals. This created a desperate, violent and anxious atmosphere which informed staff behaviour. The centre is very close to the airport. You could see and hear the planes. This caused detainees a lot of anxiety and stress. It made Brook House a particularly despairing place, whereas in other centres it was possible to have hope of release and a new life. There were regular removals at Brook House, and these sometimes resulted in violence, shouting and or screaming. Staff did not approach these situations with a calming attitude. A lot of the time they made it worse by using violence and angry words themselves. It was a vicious cycle. I'm suffering from poor mental health as a result of everything I experienced in detention. I am changed, totally and dramatically, as a person. I feel scared and try to always be alone. When I see groups of people, I avoid them. I prefer to stay at home, and if I do go out, I go by myself, walking alone. I find it difficult to be with other people. Paragraphs 166 to 169, summarised as D1538, then provides information on his mental health symptoms and diagnoses, which have in part been caused by his periods in immigration detention. And then finally, Chair, just to read paragraphs 170 and 174 at the end of the statement. I think there are so many things that need to be looked at and changed in detention centres. I think one of the main things is healthcare. People don't get the right support in terms of services. Secondly, the treatment by staff of people in detention is a very important area to look at and improve. I do not fully understand why the treatment is like it is, as bad as it is, but I've already explained above at paragraph 164 why I think the culture at Brook House was so bad. I think it was worse than other IRCs because Brook House is particularly focused on charter flights and removals, as explained above. The first consequence of this is that men held at Brook House are particularly anxious and despairing. The second is that there are regular removals, and sometimes men resist these removals. This created a violent, hostile, angry atmosphere between staff and detainees. I do not understand how almost all of the staff members failed to raise concerns about what they saw at Brook House. As far as I'm aware, Callum Tully was the only staff member who did so in the relevant period. It is shocking to me that he seems to be the only staff member in the relevant period who was affected by what happened and felt so bad about the situation that he decided to do something. They also need to change the food. The quality of it was terrible. Personal hygiene, things like the ability to get your clothes washed, also needs to change. The ability to do these basic things was very poor. I also found that the cells were very dirty. Although improvements to the physical conditions of the cells and lack of privacy are important, I think the most important factor by far is the treatment of those in detention by detention staff. The conditions, like ventilation, cleanliness and space, were not good, but the key thing to improve is the treatment of men in detention by staff. The thing is, when you are in detention, you are in a constant state of not knowing and uncertainty. I was taken to detention. I did not know when I was leaving, or if I was leaving, and where I'd be going. It's like a forgotten prison with forgotten prisoners. You don't know what is happening or what will happen. And so many people stay there for so long, for so many years, in this state. Chair, the statement ends with a statement of truth and signed on the 13th of February 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you.
Chair, I think that concludes the evidence today because of the change with the witness being able to come. So if, with your permission, we'll return tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Indeed, thank you. Thank you very much for the evidence on on behalf of all five men. Very much appreciated. And yes, I will see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much. Thank you.